Radnor Township Planning Commission. We are going to start with we're going to start with introducing our newest member. Down to my right, your left, Regina Majorsack. Regina, take 1 minute, turn on your mic and introduce yourself. Tell us about you, your family, anything you'd like to tell us.
Hi, I'm Regina Majorsack. I have 3 children here in Radnor Township. We've been residents for about 6 years now. And I'm a civil engineer. That's my background. And I'm just really thankful to have this opportunity to participate.
Thank you very much and welcome aboard. Okay, on the agenda, the minutes. Sue, a couple people claim they did not get the minutes, so I'm going to push that to the 13th. We'll review the minutes for next week's meeting. So we're going to skip number 1 and go right to number 2 on the agenda, which is the discussion, recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, the C1A zoning district. I'm going to ask a resident who has written a very nice one-page history on this request. I will give you the 50,000-foot version, which was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. We were asked to take a look at the C1A or the C1 zoning in 3 particular areas. Why don't you come forward and go ahead and read your letter? It stopped. It started. It's been a long process. We have not seen this zoning changes, proposed change. The implementation committee has seen it. There's been several meetings with the neighbors. But we have not seen it publicly, so this is the first time we've seen it. So I'm going to ask you to pass out as many copies of that letter that you have. We're going to let you do the history, then ask you to sit down, and we're going to jump right into the documentation.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Wright, and I live on Lenore Avenue. To the members of the Planning Commission, the introduction of the C1A ordinance is the culmination of a lengthy process which began in 2007 when many of the residents of our West Wayne district of historic South Wayne attended the May 14, 2007 Board of Commissioners meeting. I stood before the commissioners that evening to present neighborhood concerns regarding the proposed development of 229 West Wayne Avenue. Zoning changes to that property were being proposed by the same developer who had recently completed Wicklow on the east side of West Wayne Avenue. At that time, the neighbors felt that any change in zoning would not be consistent with the goals and the vision of the comprehensive plan supporting mixed use in smaller neighborhoods along Conestoga Road. We asked the board to consider the impact of the proposed development at that time. In December of 2007, the West Wayne District neighbor sent then-Commissioner Tom Masterson a letter with accompanying signatures favoring the current zoning as it existed and in support of the comprehensive land use plan. In January of 2008, we again came before the commissioners. At the suggestion of Cheryl Tamola, Vice President of the Wayne Public Safety Association, we requested the input and expertise of the Implementation Committee to assist us with our vision of our West Wayne district. The commissioners granted our request, and subcommittee members began meeting with the Implementation Committee and Matt Bauman over the next year. In March of 2008, the West Wayne Subcommittee met with the Implementation Committee together with the Eithon Group to begin developing a zoning draft. 4 public meetings were held. On January 29, 2009, March the 10th, 2009, April 21, 2009, and October 22, 2009. The subcommittee continued the process of modifying and enhancing the C1 zoning ordinance to support the residential and mixed-use needs of our West Wayne district of historic South Wayne. This 4-year process, working with the Implementation Committee, resulted in the ordinance that you have before you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a map? John, do you have the zoning map we can put up on the screen here so everybody can be on the same page?
This is the map that's attached to
Ed.
There's 2 versions of this ordinance, so this is attached to what I have marked as version B.
Ed, that's
A and
actually
B.
my question for you. So the letter that Mrs. Wright just presented to us, it says this 4-year process working with the Implementation Committee resulted in the ordinance you have before you. Which version is that ordinance, A or B?
We have 2.
So which one is to which is she
A
referring?
is the Implementation Committee, and B
Is her group.
is the residents'
The
version,
residents group, thank you.
I think. Yeah. So as we look at the map, on Conestoga Road, we're as far east or right down to, that's probably the Secret Gardens property, correct? Keystone Gardens, up to Adelberger's Florist, then. Sure, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Andrew DeMayo. I own the property at 250 Conestoga Road, which is...
Can you point to it
Ralph-
on the map for me,
Sure.
Andy?
It's Ralph DeMayo, Inc.
Yeah, your head's blocked, there you go.
Let's see. Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
First, here I am over here.
Good. Straighten that up for me, Andy, if you don't mind, thank you.
In response to Kathy's letter, which is a good history of really actually what happened, but I think what you guys ought to be also aware of is the fact that during these meetings, there was never ever really any communication with the actual property owners that were going to be affected directly by this change. So I guess it was starting maybe, was it 2009, Kathy, that we started to kind of get together?
Like maybe by this, right, Matt Bauman had public meetings, and then we invited neighborhoods. We actually met here in the Township building for one of them, and we got signatures.
Why don't you go up to the mic, go up to the mic.
We met in the Township building under Matt Bauman and Baron Gemmer's suggestions to get the neighbors interested once everybody seemed to be branching out to all the businesses along Conestoga Road.
So what I want to say to you is that the version B is the proposed change to the C1 to C1A that the West Wing Committee, is that what you guys are called?
Yeah, the West Wayne District, when we first started out, yes.
And the option A is from the actual property owners and what they feel should be implemented in this zoning. So that is the rub as you guys approach this. So I just wanted to make you aware of where we stand with all this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So with that being said, let's just dive into,
May I ask a question?
we have option A, which is signed by the implementation committee. So I'm going to start with that document. I'm going to go through, let's go through paragraph by paragraph to get a feel, John. I'm going to ask you to help me, and David, jump in wherever you want, to help me through this, and committee, of what the proposed changes are. I don't want to get into the detail of the wording. At this point, I want to go through line by line of exactly what the intent was. We do have Cheryl and Steve here from the implementation committee if we need them to define it, but let's try to walk through it ourselves to get a feel for what it is, and we need their help. We'll ask you guys to come forward. Thank you very much. So I turn to page, I don't have a page number, but a paragraph 280-47 or use regulations, paragraph A, and where it says with a gross floor area not in excess of 10,000 square feet, that has been taken out.
Yeah, that's a big vote of attention.
Understood. We're just going to go through them, Andy, for right now, and just try to describe what's in here, and then hear both sides, and then we'll get into it. That's what we're going to try to do.
Excuse me, Ed?
Yeah, can I just make a suggestion? Because the version that the commission is looking at is dated June 4th, 2009. So that came from the implementation committee. And I think what's proposed in terms of going section by section against what's currently on the books, that version, you can see what's being deleted, what's being added. It's color-coded. I hope everybody has a color-coded copy. So I would suggest the Planning Commission have their discussion where you all are on this, and then open it up for public comment, because we can't have people talking from the audience and asking questions. So let's just do it that way, and it'll be orderly, and then when you're done with your discussion, open it up for some input.
Ed, actually, could I make a suggestion and take it for what it's
Right.
worth? Version B, my understanding of it, it's not to say it's better, worse, good, whatever. to be the most efficient, version B has the changes that include both the implementation committee and the neighbors that I think were just represented by Mrs. Wright. And that which is different between those two versions is highlighted in yellow additionally. So if we really wanted to be able to, it's almost as if we're able to look at three versions of the ordinance all at once. The original C1 ordinance, the changes that were made by the implementation committee, which are color-coded red and blue, and then those changes that were also added by that West Wayne Neighborhood Committee, which is highlighted in yellow on that same version. So that might be our most efficient version to look at tonight.
Then why don't I do this? Steve or Cheryl, would you come up just for 2 or 3 minutes and give us an overview of, again, what your intent was here, and maybe you can highlight the 4 or 5 major changes, what the direction was that you have so that the public audience understands, because they don't have access to this document, and then we'll dive in. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Ed. First of all, I'm going to try to remember. Pardon me?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, Steve Palantonio, Chair of Implementation. Cheryl Tamola, Vice Chair. And although 2009 wasn't that long ago, to me it's like 5 decades in my mind. So you'll have to I have to apologize. So a couple of weeks ago, when I heard this was coming back on to the Planning Commission, I tried to rebrief myself, and I tried to do the best I can. And what I do remember is basically what Kathy Wright had said is they went to the Board of Commissioners and asked for the Implementation Committee to help look at that one little area based on the comp plan that we did, which was the Conestoga corridor, Garrett Hill, which already was done, the Wayne BOD, which was completed, and then there's the Itham Village area as well as this West Wayne area. But the main goal was to look at this and see, once we started looking at the C1 and how far it's been outdated, and there was language in there, that really didn't pertain about night watchmen and things like that. What we wanted to do, in keeping with the comp plan, was to make this, if there was redevelopment, make it better. So there's mixed use and some other things that would hopefully keep that center vibrant, as well as a good thing for everybody. So we came up with some different languages and see what we could do. To me, no-brainers like drive-throughs, things like that would create some different traffic patterns and so forth. Laundromats that you had to take off premises to clean and things like that. So again, what we tried to do was just come up with a draft, and here's the draft, and then take it out and see where it goes, and then from there it would have come back to the Planning Commission and go from there. So after we did the implementations version, I think we kind of stepped back and said, this is what we came up with, and then there was some public meetings and there were some other areas. And I know Andy DeMayo, that he was very vocal in a lot of the public meetings. A lot of what he said was accurate. I mean, he's a property owner there, and so you had to take a lot what was being said. I know the Adelbergers as well, to understand their concerns and try to fit it in. So specifically, I mean, if you have a specific question, I'll try to answer it. I know Cheryl will, but again, I apologize because I haven't looked at this thing until I knew about it 2 weeks ago, and I really just got this stuff offline not long ago to try to catch up to speed again. So
Let me ask a general question. I thought when we first saw this, I don't remember what it was, we never officially saw it, but I thought the talk was we were going to stop at the trail. And the map that we're showing here attached actually goes further west on West Wayne. I guess we're down past the pizza
yeah,
shop,
you got
maybe?
right. And
So is that correct, Cheryl?
That
or
is
there-
absolutely
Yeah,
correct.
you're correct. Stopping at the trail.
Stopping at
was
the trail.
our intention.
And the
Okay.
main reason was that once we got past the trail and into the Highland Avenue section, and you had the playground and Dr. Hunt's areas, it seemed like it was almost a different
Yeah.
ball game from, even though it was 100 yards away from everything on top of that,
Well,
with
the
the
whole
commercial. So instead of maybe lumping in what was ever going to be changed above the trail towards Conestoga to the smaller area, which is definitely more residential, though, even though it's commercially zoned, we felt that it's first to see how this goes and see if there's any consensus, and then possibly either modifying to take care of this one little section.
So do
we
me a
know what
favor,
it's-
Steve, point to that on the map so the audience at home understands. So we're talking from where it says Radnor Multipurpose Trail. Yep.
We looked at everything.
Cheryl,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Cheryl.
That's right. Oh, I can't move this now.
We have all these tools. Might as well use it.
You want to use it now?
I
There
don't know
you
if I
go.
can hold this.
Tough,
It's a
Steve.
double task, it's tough. You need to turn it on.
Turn it on, Steve.
That wasn't.
Wasn't on, you're lucky.
Okay. The trail, am I good now?
You
Am
just
we
lost
good
your
to go?
job on E
Okay.
ESPN, but go ahead.
Yeah, here's the trail. And what the C1, C1A, et cetera, is everything up here. Here's Conestoga Road. Down here, this is Dr. Hunt's area, I believe. Over here is the playground or the park, I forget the name of it, and Ordericio. And this area down here, Highland Avenue, was a lot more dense with residential, a lot smaller lots. And we felt it was more important to look at this area first. So anything that we had, we meaning the implementation, did not have anything down below this trail.
That was not our intention.
Not our intent.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Right.
That's fine.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to focus on.
I'm not
So-
sure if you had any other comments.
Well, I do want to remind you how important this is in the comprehensive plan, the idea of taking these neighborhood commercial districts and strengthening them, so that it's all part of also the walkability that we look for in the comprehensive plan, the sustainable neighborhood thing. So that is why a lot of this is motivated and written such, to do that, to make it a sustainable walking community that's integrated with downtown Wayne as well, and with the trail. That's why the sidewalks are in there, the whole thing.
Are there sidewalks that go all the way from the trail down to the Conestoga and West Wayne Avenue intersection?
The east side.
That's the Italian-American Club side?
No, the opposite side. You can't really have a sidewalk on the Italian-American Club side. There's a stone wall there and it drops off. And underneath the railroad bridge, there's no sidewalk there on the west side. So the east side, that's why there's that crosswalk on West Wayne Avenue to get you from that walking area to walk over to the trail. There's a little marked.
Just up to Conestoga Road, though, right, Cheryl? There's no sidewalks going down Conestoga Road? Either.
There are. They are spotty at best. There's sidewalks around the old Wayne Beef and Ale. They kind of disappear for a little bit during the Keith Martin area. They reappear again with the smaller buildings. And they're there in front of those two buildings where the Borzell and Norbury is and the
Okay.
pool place. So there, there's.
Do they go past Bloomingdale Avenue?
Do they go past Bloomingdale? Every once in a while, if you walk along there, there's a piece of sidewalk.
But it's not a it's not a continuous walking thing.
No, I walk there, but I don't think everybody wants to. I mean,
Ed, one other thing I wanted to bring to your attention too, is you can see the zoning line, excuse me, for the C1. And you'll notice that there's properties here that are split, residential and into the zoning areas here. What we didn't, again, the implementation committee did not want to do is make any recommendation whether this should be all residential or all commercial, or even go with the fact of combining that. So we figured that was a different set of circumstances for another type of board to see what would be best for that whole situation. So you'll see that in our recommendation, we had nothing to do with changing one or the other. So just to give clarification on that.
So Steve, that really affects every property on the west side of West Wayne, north side?
Yeah,
How about that?
even smaller down to Dr. Hunt's
All the way-
area.
And all the way up to Adelberger's and the one next
That
door,
is
which is the
correct.
house. So
That's a
every
house.
one of those on that side, of the IAC side of West Wayne, is affected by that split zoning.
That is correct,
Okay.
yeah.
And several going down Conestoga Road to
Yes.
the sort of northeast side behind Keith Martin's.
Absolutely.
Steve?
Oh, go ahead.
The properties south of the trail on West Wayne,
These,
yes.
yes.
They are residential?
No, they're commercial, but they're houses.
So was there talk of changing that over to the adjoining residential neighborhood so that so that commercial development wouldn't encroach so close into that neighborhood?
Well, yes, so we did, I'm sorry, we did talk about it, but that's when we decided, again, now these are zoned commercial. Is it our right to say, no, now you should change this to residential? That, although any of these properties, you can't build too much on there, but there's a possibility somebody might buy these consolidate the lots and put up a small apartment building, whatever. So that's when we decided, you know what, this is a lot trickier than it looks to go either way, and we decided to split that out. So we never really got into the full discussion aspect of what to do anyway down this way.
Okay, thank you.
And in a previous comprehensive plan, it was decided that we should do that at one point. There was thought that we should do that. And after much discussion about it, we decided that they function pretty well the way they are as residences that are zoned commercial. For the time being, they're not, deteriorating. People aren't selling them off. They're performing a service to the community in some way. And people didn't want to lose that concept of being a commercially zoned property. They thought they were more valuable that way. So, in a sense, at that time, there was a lot of worry about takings. We didn't want to reduce someone's property value by doing that.
Steve, help us out with the map a little bit more. I'm going to go down Conestoga Road towards, yep, the third lot down past Pop. So the corner Beef and Ale, then the kind of the flag lot there, the next one over. That is in the C1 zoning or partially in the C1 zoning?
I don't remember correctly, but I don't think that's in there according to this map. Now, again, maybe there might be a portion of it. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Although it's listed here. But to me, I think it probably is. I can't imagine everything else not being there. If there's a clearer map, maybe.
It's not in. I think
It's not in, okay.
No, it's part of R5.
Part of R5, and it'll stay R5. Okay.
Right.
Put it in there. That's good.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Do you happen to know if this creates many non-conforming properties, or it doesn't change any of the zoning so that you're not creating additional non-conforming?
Right.
I think, and I know Barron can talk about that. I know that, at least on the website where I got this, there was a, what is there now, and I believe most of it is non-conforming, Kathy.
So it's already non-conforming,
As far
and
as
you're
I
not
know,
making
yeah.
it any worse?
That's correct.
And you're also, as I understood what you just said, not changing the zoning, really? Okay, you're
Correct. You're just
changing what the
modifying.
zoning would allow?
Right.
Okay.
Characteristics of the zone.
Okay.
And the reason for the C1A is that instead of changing all of C1, obviously that might not apply to somewhere else in the township, so this is very specific to this area.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, can we summarize then the goals for the overall, but the whole reason for doing this, that it sounds to me from what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the goal is to look at this C1 zoning district, to adjust it to better support the existing comp plan, which has been done at the point that this was taken over. And to do that, we're looking to do whatever we can to enforce a sustainable, walkable community with mixed uses, residential and commercial, keeping that small village scale feel to it, and to update antiquated language in the zoning. Anything else?
That's,
I think
yeah,
pretty much
that was
sums
pretty
it up.
much what we had thought.
Great. Any other questions for Steve?
Yeah, actually, I do. That one, trapezoidal piece that was excluded, that's just not in the zoning now, is that correct? Is that?
Right, I don't
Where I
believe
just wrote
so.
in,
No,
Steve?
Excuse me?
The one I just wrote in, right here?
Yeah, that one there, yeah.
right.
Yeah,
That's R5.
Apparently that was not in there to begin with. It's not there now.
It's not
And you didn't want to add it,
Now, again, we didn't go,
you just wanted to stay within what was
what was
there
already
and just,
there.
okay.
Yes.
What use is that right now? What is the
I think
R5?
it's Wicklow.
Okay.
I think they got a zoning change to build Wicklow.
I think so, too. I was
So
gonna mention
it
that,
probably
but
was
It
commercial,
was-
and then it was
one-
changed to residential. That's, if I understood Mrs. Wright's letter.
The
That's what
peculiar-
happened with Wicklow.
It was a peculiar zoning change in that it didn't come before the Board of Commissioners, which made me uncomfortable, but at any rate.
And another quick question, the zoning boundary line, that is the current commercial zoning boundary
Yes.
line?
Yes, if that map's correct.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, I mean,
There's
that was our
11 here,
intent.
too.
We didn't
Yeah.
change it,
It
so
was
if
our
that's
intent
correct, then yes.
Not to go beyond the scope that it already is.
Either exclude anything or add anything else into it. Now, if somebody down the line, like we said, that the properties above, if some other board or commission or zoning board, whatever, or if an individual use wanted to come in and change one or the other, that's, you know, that's their right as a property owner. But we felt we had, definitely did not have the authority or even want to go there of which one would be better.
And actually, it kind of brings some of the buildings to the north of the West Wayne Avenue more in conformance by having actual, our plan allows residences in the C1 district, and before they were not supposed to be there. So they probably were not non-conforming all of this time. So now they're a little more in conformance anyway.
Okay, you had mentioned that in the implementation committee's review, they chose not to address whether or not the zoning line should be changed as well.
Right.
Have you heard from other groups? Are there strong opinions about that?
Yes. I'd say not groups, but individuals who own property there want, want it to be all one or all the other. I think there's a really good reason why we left it the way it is. For one thing, we did not want to go in there and mix everything up and throw everything up in the air and make a jumble of this. And the fact that there is a residential zone immediately abutting this gives them a buffer of another, a denser, but another residential area in between them and the commercial. So the backs of those buildings, all along, especially on the corner of Conestoga and West Wayne, it does kind of protect the residential area that's connected to this.
John, let me ask you a
Another
question.
residential zone.
Cheryl, let me interrupt just for 1 second.
Sure.
In a lot, and we have many here, looks like almost half of the lots that we're talking about here tonight are a split zoning. From a township point of view, if you're C1 in the front and R5 in the back, how is that property looked upon from a zoning point of view?
Problematic. I mean, I don't think any planner would ever recommend split zoning
From the get-go?
50-50. I mean, you always have some little edges
Yes, right.
that are, like on the Conestoga side, there's some corners and edges, but, if somebody wants to redevelop or add on to, you're dealing with two sets of regulations, lot size, and you may be able to put a residence in the back end of that, but these are all existing buildings on these lots, correct? Or they're existing
Yes.
businesses?
They're,
Not all, but most.
I mean,
yeah, most of them.
I understand the rear is residential, but I think that doesn't really give the other residences that much of a buffer, because you're creating an argument for any of those property owners to come in front of the zoning hearing board and do what they want to do in the commercial zone on the whole property. It's just not a good planning, and I didn't realize that that's what it is currently. It's currently split zone, which I don't think anybody here probably knows why that was done whenever that was done many years ago, but I think you want to follow property boundaries in almost all cases. Otherwise, it's a problem for the zoning officer, it's a problem for somebody that wants to redevelop, and it creates some conflict, because now you have a neighbor that maybe once will oppose something, and now you've given them a pretty good tool because it's split zone. So I think as much as possible, you want to follow the property boundaries if you're going to start drawing lines here with a new zoning district.
And Steve and Cheryl, so your thought was those that have the split zoning, the front or the C1 portion would become C1A, or you were saying those you really don't want to address, this document doesn't address those properties?
Yeah, you could,
We
whatever
want-
you think, but.
Yeah, we
What we-
wanted the C1A. The whole point of our not doing the total revamping of this area is that we wanted to make a change to the C1 zoning category and allow, as we have in other, like the Wayne Business District, to make it available to make a more tight community by having residential above. We didn't want to get into the whole revamping of zoning, because this was just this. The A tells you that we were just kind of tweaking it. We weren't going in there and reworking the whole neighborhood, knowing that it's very problematic, and knowing that the major one could be developed, half of it could be developed as R5, and half of it could be developed as, you know, it's not inconceivable that the two portions of two zonings could be on the same lot.
And what we thought was not fair in any respect was, say, these 4 lots here, if, for instance, we said, okay, this is all now C1 or C1A. Well, somebody could buy these 4 lots, consolidate them, and that's one big building envelope. What effect that would have on everything else? Obviously, there would be effect, good or bad, but we didn't have the wherewithal to go in and try to get every scenario of what would happen. And vice versa, if it was all residential, what would happen now?
So if you keep the C1, what would be the C1A zoning line where it is, you force the commercial towards the street where you want it, and you keep the scale smaller.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Steve, how do we address that with the Wayne overlay district? Did we have as many split zoning lots? I don't remember.
I actually, I don't think there was any. If
Okay.
anything,
Okay.
like Mr. Rice was saying, it might be the corner of a lot or two,
Right.
but
Nothing major
nothing
like
to
that.
this where it was 50-50.
Okay. Right.
What about in Garrett Hill?
It was much cleaner.
You know what? I don't know.
Say that question again, sir?
I was saying, what about in Garrett Hill? Do we have the split zoning in Garrett Hill?
I don't think we did
Apparently
either.
not.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're clear.
Our resident, Garrett Hill resident is here.
Lillian says no.
Thank you.
Do you know the average age of the original buildings along here?
Average age? No.
Okay.
The only thing I know is here, which used to be a big church that coincided with the, I guess, this little gatehouse here in the cemetery. That was knocked down, but I think outside of Wicklow, and this area here, this is the apartments or condos, right, Cheryl?
Right.
Yeah,
Graythorn
it's part-
Woods.
Graythorn. I think everything else, I know these buildings, the
They're
homes
pretty old.
here, I know everything up here seems to be pretty much,
Oh, well,
pardon me, I'm sorry, Doug?
They look to me like they were built in the 20s to the 30s.
maybe,
I don't know the age, but I know they weren't built in the 70s or 80s.
Right.
So,
Right,
you
they're
know.
They're pre-World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all
Yes.
pre-World
Yes.
War
They've been living
II.
with the situation for a very long time, and they seem to be content with it. This was our concept at any rate, that they were content with it.
And some of the residents might know better which houses are homes and some of the average age, but
Ed, could I make a suggestion?
Go right ahead.
So, there, further down, because there's still, I mean, we haven't even started to look at the actual ordinance. There's a lot of calculations and formulas and everything further down that if we start to go through the ordinance, and then, we're not going to come to any resolution tonight, and we probably shouldn't. I mean, it's a lot to digest. But maybe over the next month, once we understand some of these formulas better and scales and things that have been presented to us, you know, on our own time, some homework, we could see what the impact on those 1, 2, 3, was it about 10 properties, 11 properties, would be with the split zoning, depending on some of the choices we're making for some proposed language. And that might reveal to us the impact of of consolidating the zoning and changing the lines versus leaving them split. You know, some of this might get revealed to us with some of these calculations that are here to be looked at. But that we might need to do some of that first.
I think I agree. I think tonight is kind of an education to bring us up to speed on the last 4 years, because many of the board wasn't here 4 years ago. We never saw this anyway. Take this tonight. I'd like to hear exactly what Steve and Cheryl have done, was give us the overview. We have the documents with their changes. Blue is the adds, reds are the deletes, and then we have the additional changes in yellow, blue, which are the additional adds and deletes. I'd like to ask any specific questions we have of Steve, Cheryl, or John, or anyone in the audience tonight. Ask the residents to come forward to give their comments on the general plan. I don't want to dig into specifics, but they have them. Make the comments tonight. break for a month, not next week, obviously, because that agenda's already set, but then come back in January and do much like we did with a few of those, then dig in and kind of go through it line by line. So that's my goal. If anybody sees it differently, or can see a way to do it easier, let me know. So other questions then for Steve or Cheryl or John or Dave?
It seems to me that basically what you did was you're not doing anything about redrawing the lines. All you're doing is revising what you're allowed to be doing inside here. You could even go so far as to leave the redrawing of the line issue for somebody else.
That's basically what we did.
Comprehensive
Yeah.
plan.
Okay. We don't want
Is that a
to,
volunteer
there's no reason
show?
to make two troubles, you know. Just make one meeting's trouble. You know.
All right, so with that, I'm going to thank you two very much
Okay.
and
Thanks,
keep you
Ed.
here for a few more minutes in case there are questions. And I'm
Sure.
going to ask for public comment
You want this
at
here?
this point in time. Yeah, please leave that there. Please keep the map up there. And I'll ask for any public comment. Sir, come right forward.
My name's Ted Adelberger. I'm the bad boy here, I guess, from the start of all this thing, it seems like, but not true. However, some of the statements you made, let me show you something here on the map. If I can do this. This is pretty small, but the one in orange, the part in orange there is my property. It's about an acre and a half. If you see a line coming right across here, it cuts right through the corner of my property, through my building, and then through a house on the corner. It completely landlocks that R5. Landlocks, it means I can't use it, I can't sell it, I can't build anything on it, I'm not even allowed to be on it, I guess, at that point. There are two buildings back there that, how old you want to know they are? They're 131 years old. One of them's a barn. It should be torn down. I'd love to tear it down. The township told me at the time, in 1970, when I went to the township, I wanted to build some stores behind my flower shop that would be in, conjunction with my business, cheese shop, for weddings and so forth, wedding shop and so forth. They said, you can't build anything there. That's landlocked. You can't get to that piece of property. You can't build anything there. That's not the C1. That's R5. We never knew that. We never heard that. The township gave me this map and said, it happened sometime back in the late 20s, 30s. They drew a line. They literally just drew a line. There are no measurements on those lines telling you exactly where those lines should be. I've had...
Ted, do you own 225 also, or just 229?
229 and 255. It's the back part.
Okay.
This is the property here, this whole thing here. You can see where the line is now. They moved, they said they weren't going to move any lines. Well, if anything, it's good if they're going to move the line. They have some access to my back piece of property now back here. Can you see that?
Yes.
It used to go right to the corner. Now it comes down here, which is fine if that's the case. However, it's still not big enough for me to access it. I need 100 feet. Told me I need 100 feet to be able to build back there or do anything back there. I think at this point, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's about maybe 58 feet or 60 feet or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't have any measurements on it. I have nobody that can give me measurements on it. There are no measurements anywhere. I've had the place done at least 2 or 3 times by engineers and so forth. This. Maybe you can see this better. This shows the whole property right here. It's a good-sized piece of property. I own this little piece back here. We sold it to the people that bought this house, and then we bought it back from them. So it's still all one piece of property. It's all R5. This is C1. I will say Kathy Wright is right in saying that she didn't want to have big buildings like Wicklow built across the street, and they did come to me and made me a heck of a great offer to buy that property if I could get it zoned, all one zone. It never happened. It never going to happen. The commissioners told me that no way they're going to change zoning of a whole piece of property. Okay, that's what they said. But now we've been changed twice already. Now we're going to go in a third time. I mean, this is really getting pretty confusing. I don't know what else to say other than the fact that if it's C1A or C1B or whatever, that's going to be a tough place to sell, that front part. if there's not enough parking. And there's not enough parking. And no business can exist on that corner unless you have parking, because we have an awful lot of cars come in and out, and my customers and my employees. I realize that as long as I'm there, it stays the way it is. It doesn't change. I'd love to tear those buildings down in the back. If I tear them down, I lose them. They're right on the property line back here. They're right on the property line. I wouldn't like that if I lived back there. I'd like to see them the heck out of there and put a nice apartments or something in there, smaller, not big, not the big ones like Wicklow had. But in 1970, I was really shot down when I really wanted to do exactly what you're allowed to do now in the front. Stores with apartments above them. No, can't do that. No way. Can't have that. Township told me that. I don't know where to go from here. I really don't. It's, it's up to, I'm not going to build big, I can't do it because I can't get the zoning for that. But I would like to have access to it or a variance to get to it so I could put a house in there or do something. I mean, I've had at least 5 or 6 people in the last 3 years wanting to buy that piece of property, but they can't build on it. So it's really a hardship. I mean, I'm almost 80 years old. I'm not about to build anything back here myself. I mean, that's just my story. I don't know what else to tell you other than the fact that I was told the only thing left, if it's zoned the way it is, the only thing I can put in there is Section 8 housing or something like that, because then they can, they don't need all that stuff. I don't know. I don't think that's possible. It could be. I don't know. The state said they could do it, but it's a nice piece of property. It's about an acre, 4.5 or something like that, almost an acre and a half. And we've had it for 130 years, and I'm the 3rd generation. But to have the township show me with the zoning lines that we couldn't build back there then, which I thought we could because I thought it was all one piece of property. It was agriculture 130 years ago. There was only one house within sight of that piece of property when my grandfather bought that. So it was actually, I don't know if they zoned it then, but they called it agricultural. Then just thought it normally turned into be a C1 or whatever. We had boilers and burners, and they ought to be glad we don't have that there anymore. But I like to tear down what's back there and clear it off. The kids on the street, they all play baseball back there. They love it. They think it's great. I don't think the township wants to buy another piece of property that they can't do anything with. I don't know what else to say on the fact that I'm, beside myself with this whole thing.
I have a question for our solicitor on this.
Ted, can you leave us one of the maps? You took our map also. Just
I'm sorry.
one of the maps?
Pardon?
Leave the map.
Leave a map?
Yeah. One of those was ours. Just leave it all right on the table.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all. Thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If that is all one property and it's split zoned, as it appears to be, but the question is
Thank you,
where
sir.
it's split, why can't that be used for parking for the commercial property, and it would be a non-conforming continued use of it if that's the way it's been? Or why couldn't there be access across that if he were to subdivide it, an access road across the commercial property onto the residential portion so that he could develop it as housing? That doesn't seem logical to me.
Well, I mean, I don't know how I can answer that question, but I think his problem, and I'm not familiar enough with the property, and you spoke to somebody 40 years ago about this, what you said. You might want to talk to somebody today about it in
I would
terms
say
of
so, yeah.
what you can or can't do with it. But and this I think applies to all the split zone properties, is front's commercial, you can put a building and parking there, but you can't put the parking on the residential part.
Don't we have other properties in the township where this exists in a grandfather situation where it's actually very similar, where you have residential across the back and it's a continued non-conforming use? There's been parking there all along. Maybe
Right.
they parked horses, now they're parking cars. But it's been something where you rest some sort of vehicle on it. Why couldn't that be a grandfathered use and continued?
If you're talking about whether or not any of those split zone properties or any split zone properties have some non-conforming status, you have to investigate it because it had to have been established.
And his property's pre-zoned,
And
we're
that-
pre-zoning.
Yeah, but, what was going on the property at that time. I mean, the only way you can establish, you can't just say that
I know, you have to
because
look
we
at it
have this
historically.
here, this applies across the board in the township. But I would suspect his problem is that he can't put enough parking on the commercial part of that lot to support a commercial use, and you can't put commercial parking on a residential piece of ground. That's probably his, not knowing anything else other than what this gentleman said tonight, I suspect that's his problem. So unless he could establish that there was parking for the commercial use on the rear, or any of these properties on the rear, predating zoning, and then you got to go back and look at when was the first zoning ordinance established. It's not an easy exercise. And
No, but it can be investigated.
yeah, it absolutely can be, and we've done some of those on some of the properties. But I think that's his issue, and that's why, if you're going to have a commercial zone, I think there may be some reasons to split zone properties in some instances, but in most cases, you want to follow the property boundaries. There's other ways to restrict the size of what can go on there, other than split zoning. I mean, you can have a maximum building size, no matter what the lot size is. There's other ways to do it without split zoning.
Excuse me, John, I think earlier in this meeting you said that you definitely did not recommend split zoning, and that the appropriate time to correct it might be now?
Well, I'm not making a judgment on whether to correct it or not. That's going to be up to the commissioners. Somebody split zoned this property. I don't know how long ago it was when the C1 was created, maybe in the 70s, maybe earlier. Was there a planning reason at that time? Maybe. I sort of doubt it. So I think if you're starting from scratch with a piece of, a large zoning district that's not developed, you have an area this is not vacant land. Most of these properties have buildings and structures on them. So there's some history of use out there, even with the split zoning. But if you were starting from scratch, you would not split zone properties. I mean, that is not a good planning idea ever, in my opinion. This is a little different because you got existing uses, you have a developed area. But I still think it would make sense and the commissioners, this board makes that recommendation, commissioners would have to look at that, I would think.
In creating the district, would the zoning hearing board have to look at these properties and actually do the zoning change? I mean, we wouldn't just change the zoning district boundary, would we?
You would make a recommendation if you wanted to.
The Board of Commissioners could do it as a whole
As a
zoning district, not on individual properties.
as a zoning amendment
Okay,
and a map amendment.
right. So that would be encompassing the entire district, not looking at one particular property.
Correct.
That's what I was getting.
But you
Okay,
could
thank
pick out certain properties, couldn't you?
To rezone them?
Yes.
You could do that if you have an existing zoning district and you want to extend it, maybe one or two
To
properties.
logically follow boundary lines.
Correct.
Well, if one of your goals is to eliminate split zoning, you would be looking at specific properties.
Yeah.
There's no way around it.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think years ago, we looked at rezoning certain things, and we were looking specifically at properties to bring into compliance adjoining properties and so forth, and I don't think anything ever happened with it.
Thank you, sir.
Did you, I was in the meetings, if I remember, it started, what, '07? And then it came back again in '09? When the initial ones in '07, I thought you came to some of those meetings like a couple of years ago, did you?
Yeah, I did, but we thought we were going to be able to just change the zoning to one zone, and then that was blown out of the water, so that wasn't an issue anymore.
If you had your choice, you could change it to one zone. What would you pick?
Oh, I would build probably apartments on it, but not as big as the ones across the street. I'd build something that's within, the caliber of the houses that are around it, but I mean, type of, height and so forth. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I mean, a builder would have to do it. I've had some offers, but they don't want to touch this piece of property because of the way it's zoned.
But you'd want it all residential as opposed to all commercial.
But no, it's just the back part. They want to buy the back part, but I got to get a variance or I got to get a way to get to it. I can't have a flagpole piece of property. That's what I was told by the township.
All right. My only other question is that piece, you said there's a house built on that property right next door to you that's got the diagonal line through it?
Right through the living room.
And that was just built, wasn't it, recently, that house, or
Oh,
renovated?
that's been there. No, my father built that back in,
I'm thinking
that
of a
house is
different
100
one.
years old.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Just to follow up with Ted,
Andy, introduce yourself and point to my map again and show us all the property that you own and tell if it's commercial or residential and
I
your
own this
use there.
property here.
Thank you.
It's commercial. The line that is struck that you're discussing now, to me, it looks like to me it's like an arbitrary line that was drawn on these properties. And I agree that if you have an opportunity to address this at this time, it just makes sense that while we're here, doing this would be the time to address this. There's a lot of these properties that are here beside the IEC, but between the IEC and down to the bridge, they're all residential properties. They're treated as residential properties. They've always been residential properties. They've never had any commercial use. So that, to me, just makes sense that they be residential. I'm just speaking generally. In relation to as you guys begin to review these ordinances and the differences between the two plans, I think it's important that I understand the Wayne business overlay and their goal to try to have walkable communities and things like that. I don't know how familiar you are with that stretch of Conestoga Road. People fly down there. It's not something that people want to walk along. It's very, very dangerous. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing is that as you begin to look at the different calculations that are proposed in relation to the buildings, that what we have with C1, that what we have now, and the changes that are proposed to C1A, there's reductions in the footprints and the sizes of the buildings that can be put on these lots. And it's something that I think that as the right that we have now to reduce that, it reduces property value. So I hope you keep that in mind as you review the whole circumstances of what's proposed for you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Sir?
My name is Bo Santamaria from Atlantic Pool Service. I just wanted to say one more time, the owners of the properties didn't have any initiation in any of these changes for the zoning, but we're thankful for the opportunities brought to us. Conestoga Road is dangerous. I just spent 2 weeks replacing the deck boards on the front porch about 30 feet away from Conestoga Road. I feel the township's encouraging sidewalks on that road, that they're creating liability for the pedestrians. I feel they need to get a city or a town planner with no conflict of interest for the property owners and the township. And I feel that the property owners should not have any financial responsibility for the payment of the city or town planner. I know what you guys are doing, and it's a great idea to have sidewalks and people walking, and it's a good idea, but you don't know that road. Go sit on my front porch for 2 days, count the cars, and look at the smoke from the cars screeching to a halt because somebody's turning on Bloomingdale Avenue. Conestoga Road is the Route 30 Wayne Business District bypass. That's what they use it for, to get around Wayne, to get to Villanova, to the Blue Route, to Bryn Mawr. It's dangerous. It's a scary, scary place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
How you doing? My name is Dominic Demitis, 214 North Aberdeen Avenue. My family owns the property that used to be the old Wayne Beef and Ale. When you go through and you take a look at these changes they're proposing, keep in mind that this isn't the center of Wayne. This is a small satellite commercial area. We don't get the same rent as they do in the center of Wayne. The changes that they're proposing could affect how these businesses are run and what they can get and what they can do with the properties. So we just want you to keep in mind those factors. I do agree with Andy that the zoning should be addressed at this point. We should zone them all C1A or C1 and make those changes now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Baron Gemmer, part of the West Wayne group that helped develop. I own property just down from Adelberger's on corner of West Wayne and Bloomingdale. Just some quick comments on what the implementation committee folks had said before and some others. The addition of the portion west of the trail, that actually took place as a result. I think it was our second public meeting while we were still with the implementation committee for the first 3 public meetings, and some of the property owners down there actually asked us to include it at the group and the implementation committee. We had only proposed originally to the trail. So that's how that came about. So originally we were only following the boundary lines of C1 to the trail. Now basically the assumption is we would be rezoning the entire C1 district that is in the West Wayne area. It's been mentioned too, Julie did a great job of recapping the goals of what we did as the committee, and mixed use, adding residential was one of those. And that's what you're going to see. Andy mentioned it in terms of some of the perhaps restrictions on buildings. When you add residential to an area that's only commercial, and WBOD doesn't have quite this big issue because of the 100% impervious allowance there, you have to bring in some constraints along with that. I mean, you don't just add the residential. So you'll see that as you go through the calculations. We'll discuss that. We're not going to go over that tonight, but that's part of it, that when you bring that in, you also have to bring other things in order to maintain the scale of everything that's going on. And with Kathy, I believe you asked the question about the non-conforming. Most of the I'm not sure of any property that's not already non-conforming that would become non-conforming under these new regulations, but we will go over that in more detail. And speaking of which, when you were talking about the Adelberger property, when the development was proposed for that, there was an all commercial, all residential, and then there was one that was proposed for residential in the back and commercial in the front, with, as you said, a driveway easement on the West Wayne side, and with a few exceptions in terms of not being in compliance with some zoning in Saldo, it actually wasn't a bad plan. So I mean, it is doable in that sense. The last thing, I know you've heard from the property owners in terms of changing the property lines. I know it's problematic. We just talked about the Adelberger property, but I can almost guarantee you if you start to do that because you're going to have to do that on a property by property basis, in addition to this will never get done. I think if you, not to say that you shouldn't address it in a separate process, but my suggestion would be follow the comp plan to make C1 what the comp plan says it should be, and then decide if you want to go ahead and do that route and look at the properties and do that, or if you want to leave it the way it is now, which is individual property owners have to petition and do that. But I can just imagine all the discussion and disagreements between both the business property owners as well as the residents in terms of what would make sense, and I don't know if that's going to come to fruition in any short period of time. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Any other comment from the board?
Is there anyone here tonight who owns property on West Wayne or Highland south of the Radnor Trail? Okay.
Further comment?
My only comment, actually, it was kind of what I was getting at when I asked Mr. Rice about the going to zoning, is that I agree with what Mr. Gemmer said about individual property owners will have the opportunity to go before zoning and ask for the zoning change, which actually is a revenue-enhancing opportunity for the township. It costs money, I recognize this, but there's an application process. I mean, let me say it a different way. There is a cost associated with changing zoning. The reason that there's a cost for the applicant is that there's a cost to the township. If we were to do that kind of blanket, in addition to what Mr. Gemmer said about us, it would take us forever to get through that piece, and it could hold up the intention of the mixed-use creation. It will come at a cost to the township without revenue from an applicant to help offset that cost. I guess that would be my concern. So I would suggest that we actually follow Mr. Gemmer's suggestion and focus on the ordinance for now, get through that for now, and then if we want to go back and tackle individual properties, there may be some in plowing through these calculations that become abundantly clear it makes sense to make a change to, and others that it would be not a wash, it could be a detriment or not clear, and we could spend a lot of time doing that work, which really should be the responsibility of the property owners. That's just my opinion about that. The other thing that wasn't expressly stated here, but because I did read through the comp plan tonight, about the goal of this area is, as we're looking at these calculations, that the goal of bringing in mixed use is that we have to consider scale and maintaining the scale in a neighborhood and size, height, and things like that. So as we're looking at the plan, I think Cheryl and Steve alluded to that, but that quaint village look that Julia mentioned. But really, let's make sure we keep size and scale in the forefront of our minds as we're looking at the calculations. That's my biggest comment. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention one thing. The zoning board doesn't change zoning. They would issue a variance or give a variance or a special exception to the use. For a property to be rezoned, it has to go before the commissioners. Now, there's nothing stopping the property owner of any one of these going in and asking for a variance for that and present their case as to the history of the property and so forth. I've seen that a lot. But they don't change the zoning. That has to be done by the commissioners at a hearing.
I had a comment. Would it be appropriate for the township to possibly organize the equivalent of a group effort to rezone? In other words, deal with it. Maybe 10 of the property owners want to be fully rezoned C1A and do it all at once based on boundary lines. And in terms of cost and energy, that might, you're taking the willing first, and then the rest of them can wait because there's a cost issue or because they prefer the residential character. But you could deal with it all at once, I think, and that would be, I think, our best chance to deal with this expeditiously.
Actually, if you look at these, there's a few that really jump out at you as needing correction. The majority of them are pretty much in line with the zoning there. But you might want to do that in a two-stage process, because I think if you add that to this plan for the passage of it, that it will never happen. So you might want to do stage one, put this type of stuff into effect, and then recommend that they, as part of that, that zoning be addressed on certain properties, or looking at the zoning in certain properties in their entirety as one zone or another.
I just wanted to add one other comment. I hadn't gotten to that yet. This is very close to where I live, and I know a lot of the properties in my mind's eye right now. One of the things you have to realize is that intersection has become much more walkable. It's one of the 2 or 3 rare intersections where traffic stops in all directions. That was because kids walk to school from the middle school. There are all sorts of marked crosswalks on West Wayne Avenue, again, encouraging people to walk. You can assist in that additional pedestrian access by what we're doing here.
Any other comment? Then we'll close this for tonight and see it in January. Oh, one more public comment? Sure.
My name is Chris Santamaria. I'm from Atlantic Pool Service. Our property is right here. And I just wanted to say, I know you guys are talking a lot about zoning and lines and everything, and I just want everybody to keep in mind that these are properties that us small businesses have had. They're like value. This is our people's retirement. I think that's why everybody's so concerned, is how any change is going to affect the value of the property for sale. This isn't a hobby. So I guess, when you're looking at all the facts and figures, and people are going, no, with the zoning is going to help it, it's going to be better, you're going to be able to get more use out of your property, et cetera, and it looks good on paper. I'm not real sure if that's going to be true or not, and I guess that's why my brother spoke about someone who might be able to maybe give me a little bit more of a definitive answer on whether changing these zonings affects the value of our properties at all. I don't know, because it's just not what I do. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, it's not just lines on paper for me.
And right now, it's just it's a commercial building, is that all?
It's a commercial building, right, yeah.
Would you, if it was, obviously it's your property, do you think it would be a better or a more difficult thing to sell it or do it if it in fact had the ability to put an apartment or
I'm
residence
lucky
above
because
it?
I have one of the larger parcels, I believe. So I think it probably might not be too bad for me. But some of these properties are so small and little, and if they can't do, like, what do you do with some of the littler ones? I don't know whether they'd ever be able to put enough parking or anything to do anything with them. I don't know. There again, I just don't know. I worry not just for myself, but for the whole area. And I agree with everybody else. It's Wayne. My grandparents were born here. I've been in this area for my whole entire life. It's a great town. And you don't want strip malls going down Route 30 or down Conestoga Road. But there again, we're old-time property owners, everybody in this area pretty much. Just don't want anything to, sometimes things go wrong. Just want to make sure that once everything's signed and dotted, that it wasn't like, oh man, I wish we had thought of that.
I have a quick question for you. Is your building astride the property line, or is it definitely in one lot or the other?
Definitely on one lot. It's considered a double lot, yeah. And I worry too, if you make this all, like there's so many considerations, if you make this a big retail area, let's say, and people buy and, Talbot's goes in, are they going to cut up Bloomingdale Avenue and all those little side streets to get to us? You're going to have, there's just so many things, as I'm sure you guys know, because you do this every day. Just one question is 6 more questions, and it's what makes it difficult, so. But like I said, just thought I'd point that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, what's the status of the planner that the township's hired?
Planner?
Didn't the township hire a planner to look over?
You're talking about the community development director that was appointed last night?
No,
or
I'm talking about
URDC.
URDC.
Talking about
Thank
URDC.
you.
I'm not sure what the status of that is. That was on the agenda, I believe, once, and it was tabled. Not sure where that is. I have not been involved in that. I think with Kevin Kachansky, who was appointed last night, you'll probably see a lot more activity with things like this. He's got a pretty strong background in zoning and planning, and he's a landscape architect. And
great. Okay.
so I think you'll see that come forward, hopefully soon.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to move next on the agenda to item number 3, SD 2011 D09, a final plan, CF Holloway III and Company to construct an underground parking structure at 40 Loella Court, Wayne, Pennsylvania. Applicant is here. Thank you, sir. Oh, yeah, I'll take that. Thank you. I'm going to ask the applicant to take a few minutes to give us a presentation on the plan you're going to show us tonight and how it differs from the previous plan we saw, if at all. And then I'll turn it over to the township engineer to go through the comments. floor is yours, sir. Go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is David Falcone with Saul Ewing here on behalf of CF Holloway. We've been in front of the Planning Commission before, so I won't spend too much time describing the project, but just a little for anybody who doesn't know about it. Mr. Holloway is proposing to construct an underground garage in connection with the conversion of the existing 25 apartment units in the mansion to 12 condominiums. As part of that application process, we've gone through, and now we are into the land development phase. We are in front of the Planning Commission seeking a recommendation for final approval. When we were here last month, we had received a letter prior to that meeting from Mr. Lay, which we responded to. Additional comments were made at the last Planning Commission meeting, and a subsequent letter was issued from Mr. Lay's office. So what I've just handed up to the board, to the Planning Commission, is a copy of Mr. Lay's most recent letter on Chester Valley's letterhead with Chester Valley's responses to Mr. Lay's comments. So as we walk through the most current comments, you'll see kind of what we did and what we were thinking. The plan that's here is the plan that was submitted and reviewed, right, Angela? This is not a revised plan after this letter, though. Like we did at the last Planning Commission meeting, we've commenced those changes, but we are showing the plan that was reviewed by Mr. Lay and that you all have seen and the letter was written on. I'm going to detail my comments to just the first zoning ordinance review comment, and then I'll turn the mic over to Angelo Capuzzi, who's with Chester Valley, who can speak more specifically to some of the engineering issues. But there was some question raised at the last Planning Commission meeting about a couple of zoning issues. So in order to try and get those resolved and get an understanding of where things were, we issued a request to the township, 2 requests with respect to the loading area as well as 3 off-street parking spaces. The loading area, which is shown here on the plan, and the off-street parking spaces, which are shown here. Because of the existing nonconformity of the property, we wanted a determination as to whether or not we needed to do either of those things because there was some concern with respect to their locations. We issued a letter to the Township Zoning Officer, and we received a response dated yesterday. We received it today that informed us that with respect to the loading area, there is no current loading area on the property. That's a pre-existing nonconformity. We intend to remove that from the plan. It's a pre-existing nonconformity, and Mr. Gemmer brought it to our attention that it's inside the front yard setback as shown, so we will intend not to place a loading area on this property.
No loading area at all?
No loading area. And that was deemed to be appropriate by the Township Zoning Officer because of the current condition of the property. In addition, it should be noted that in the letter from the Township Zoning Officer, it was explained that they believe those to be most appropriate in commercial uses and that this is not a commercial use. So, again, that's going to be removed because it is a pre-existing nonconformity, and we can continue our nonconformity to that respect. Moving to the 3 parking spaces, those are also an existing nonconformity that was confirmed by the Township Zoning Officer. However, it was, because this is a land development application, it was said that we should seek a waiver with respect to those based on the pre-existing nonconformity as well as the current condition of Luella Court. So with respect to that comment from the zoning officer and the solicitor, we have sought a waiver to remove those 3 parking spaces from the plan and not provide overflow off-street parking, of which there is none presently for an increased, a more dense use of the property. It's, I think, important to remember that we are reducing the current use from 26 units to 12, 25 units to 12, and providing more parking than is currently on the site. So, based on the letters from the township, that's what we've done with respect to that zoning issue. So that's kind of what I'm here to discuss, and I believe Mr. Rice was involved as well in that discussion with Mr. Miller. So if there's any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer that before I turn it over to Angelo, but I'm not going anywhere, so if there's questions later, I'll be here all night.
I have a question.
So I just want to be clear, the waiver you're asking is to not provide the 3 spaces at all, or to provide them in the front yard, or to have the waiver to provide them in the front yard setback?
It's to not provide them at all, to remove them from the plan. Because
I just wanted a clarification of what it was you wanted. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, it's to not provide them at all.
And I'm curious from an economic standpoint. I understand that your rulings, I've seen the letters today and everything else. Would you, in a perfect world, prefer to have the 3 parking spaces and or prefer to have the loading zone?
I don't know if, I'll speak to the loading. I don't know if we believe there's a real need for the loading area for what we're intending. That was something we put on because we thought we needed it, and we thought this would be a good spot for it in the driveway. So I don't think that one is, we don't believe we need it. With respect to the overflow off-street parking, I would probably have to defer to Kaz on that, on what he generally sees for his developments when he develops these condos, whether there is that need for that excess parking. So, I mean, Kaz, are there excess parking spots at Luella, at 102 Luella? There are none at Steepleview? Guest parking spaces? There are 3. So he's kind of split. You can see on. Right. So he's split on his developments, and I think he could cut either way on it.
And is that loading space, is that driveway going away as well?
No,
or?
the driveway will stay. It'll remain a driveway.
I noticed in your response, on top of the page 2, you make the comment that the zoning officer, with guidance of the township solicitor, ultimately determined that a waiver of the subdivision land development ordinance is in order due to particular conditions pertaining to Luella Court and its existing nonconforming status. But the letter from the township says it would appear that a waiver. Now they haven't made a determination.
So it was a determination letter, which is what we requested by the MPC. We issued a determination request. So it's, when I said determined, it's a determination like an opinion would be an opine. That's why it's phrased that way, because we requested a determination. We could have said or held. That's why we made that language choice. Or I made that language choice.
The request on this issue was that there wasn't even a need to ask for a waiver since there were non-conforming conditions. So when Bill Miller looked at it and Peter Nelson looked at it and I looked at it, it's sort of a unique property, and you have a standard in your saldo, and there's another standard in the MPC for waivers. You have it at 255.11 in your saldo, and the MPC has a little different language. But since it's a land development, we felt he still had to come in and seek the waiver, even though you have all these nonconformities involving that property. That it wasn't that they didn't need to seek a waiver, but you had to make a recommendation on the waiver request pursuant to the provisions in the saldo and the MPC.
But the letter references needing a variance, which means he needs to go to the zoning hearing board. Our review letter from David, I understand about the determination about the loading area. I mean, I see that letter, but David Lay's letter
Right. They don't.
references zoning 280-105.f.
If they put the spaces in, they would need a variance.
So
But the
that's
spaces
why I
are-
was trying to clarify. He just
Spaces
wants
are
the
only
waiver.
spaces are only required because your saldo requires it.
I understand that. So that's what I was trying to clarify. So he just wants to not do parking spaces at all.
Right.
And that's his addressing the variance.
Right.
He didn't specifically say that in the letter. He just referenced the waiver that not Matt Bauman, that Bill Miller referenced. And
Right.
so you're basically avoiding the whole variance issue by removing parking spaces that you need to have.
Right, so we don't believe we need to have them, but yes, if we were to put them, and I guess, John, you can tell me if I'm right on this, if we wanted to put them inside the front yard setback, we would need a variance. If we wanted to put them inside the right-of-way, we would not need a variance. It would be
Right.
permissible.
Right.
And I think that's what we talked about at the last meeting, whether it would in the right-of-way, outside of the right-of-way, who could use it, who couldn't use it, and I think that's kind of where ultimately we came down.
I thought that the determination was if they were on the street that they could be used by anyone. They wouldn't necessarily be set aside, and therefore
That's
they didn't
right.
constitute overflow parking in accordance with the saldo.
No.
The saldo, if I remember correctly, they had to be explicitly stated, had to be all street parking.
So I think based on the information I received, we could put them inside the right-of-way, and they would satisfy this off-street parking requirement. Is that correct, David?
Yes, I mean, my interpretation, my opinion is that you could have 3 on-street parking spaces in a public, because that's a public facility, so those spaces could be used on-street to meet that requirement.
So that's why we went. That was what we went off of.
But it says off-street parking, and that doesn't constitute off-street parking.
According to your engineer, it does. So we're responding to the information we're given.
What does the solicitor say the same thing? John?
David, did I?
John, turn your mic on. Thank
It's
you.
an off-street parking space requirement under the SALDO. He's asking for a waiver. I guess the question is, let's assume he just wants to put 3 parking spaces on the street. Can he do it? And I think that's the question that David just answered.
Parking's not allowed on that side of the street, on that side of the street.
Well, then he can't do it.
That's right.
Due to some other regulation.
Which is well, that's part of the reason why they couldn't be in the right of way. They're not even allowed on that side of this.
But see, they were adjusting the right-of-way, so in other words, they were widening the road to allow the parking to occur, and they were adjusting the right-of-way so that the spaces were in the right-of-way. So it's not like the parking spaces would be in the existing cartway. There would be new paved surface created to allow that parking.
Now you say that there are going to be 2 parking spaces in the underground for each of the
Yes, sir.
residences.
Yes, sir. Each unit will have 2 spaces.
So that if a resident decides to have, has 2 cars and they have a friend come over or something, are they going to park in the basement parking garage also?
If they have 2 cars and they have a friend come over, I imagine that they would use the parking lot that's next to the mansion.
The underground parking garage?
It's above ground. It's existing.
Oh,
Doug, you're
That's not
talking
on the property.
post-development.
excuse me?
Are you talking post-development, or
Yes.
what happens now?
After the development.
Right, so they would use that parking lot. I know it's not on the property, but
Okay.
that's certainly,
Oh, that's a metered lot.
it's a metered lot.
I'm sorry, it's a permit lot.
I think
They're
it's
metered
public.
lots nearby.
That's public parking.
Per M meter, okay.
So
I have a question on
And
the
I'm sorry.
parking analysis.
Yes,
Did-
ma'am.
I'm sorry, did you want to make a point first?
Yeah, I believe the ordinance even says we can satisfy that requirement by using spaces in a lot if we so chose. So,
We need to get clarification on that. I think that's all permit. Waynewood. I don't think so. Yeah. There are meters, but you have to permit for them. Okay, we'll check that. Okay, we can just check on that, it's fine. Go ahead.
I have a question on the parking analysis.
Yes,
if I
ma'am.
could. You show required on your plans. Let's see, it's sheet.
Hold on, we don't want to jump to parking yet, we're going to go through this. If he's done, we're going to go to David.
Okay.
And we'll go through this line by line. So are you finished with the parking and the loading?
you tell me.
I think you are.
Okay.
Now we'll go to David and his letter with this Chester Valley engineer's response. David, you want to walk that through line by line? We would appreciate that.
Would you rather me just refer to my letter, or do you want me to walk through Chester Valley's? It's probably better they walk through their letter if that's what.
That's fine.
Okay. I mean, so I'll just walk through my comments. David took care of the zoning. Under subdivision land development, the first issue is a waiver for the man-made features within 500 feet. We discussed this last month. We were recommending a waiver. There was no action taken, obviously, but I didn't hear any opposition to it. I continue to recommend the waiver because the information necessary for this development is provided. So we recommend that waiver regarding the features within 500 feet. Item number 2 is a new waiver. This is based on discussions of last month regarding the sidewalk around the northwest, or the lack of sidewalk around the northwest corner of Luella. They're going to use the existing paths in order to preserve the existing trees in that corner of the property. The discussion was, will that be a public sidewalk? And I believe the applicant's answer was no, it will not. It will remain private. So to that point, I believe they need a waiver because they won't be in full compliance of providing sidewalk along the full frontage of the property. So again, we're recommending that waiver because, again, it's saving and preserving trees, which I believe was done at the direction specifically of the Shade Tree Commission.
This is along the north side of the Copper Beech tree, is that correct?
Correct, the northwest corner.
Thank you.
Exactly. Okay, so moving on, the stormwater management ordinances. Again, the issues that need addressment are in bold here. So item number 2, they just need to provide us with an operations and maintenance procedure document for the on-site BMPs. Again, not a big issue. I'm sure they'll be willing to comply with that. And moving on through general comments. Number 2, just some clarification on the existing water surface laterals that are to be removed and the proposed ones to be created. We just wanted some clarification there. Number 3 has to do with the calculation of an existing existing net lot area. Again, it's just clarification. The information they have there is fine. We just wanted it clarified that that is for the existing net lot area. And number 4, again, this is just clarification of how they calculated the square footage of their impervious surfaces. This was discussed last month. In summary, we've relooked at their calculations. We agree with the information they provided. We just think it could be presented more clearly, and that's what we're indicating in comment number 4 there. And then moving on, again, additional items that we discussed last month. Number 1 was the disturbance of steep slopes. There were some areas based on the existing contours that could be perceived as steep slopes. In response, the applicant's engineer had survey crews go out and resurvey the area and verify that those areas are not steep slopes. Number 2, the spaces, again, this is no longer an issue if the spaces are not to be provided, so we can pass over that for now. Number 3.
Is there a copy of that survey, the steep slopes?
Copy of the survey?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically, no. You know, as I'm sure you're aware, what happens is they go out there, the surveyors go out there, and they take points. They have an instrument, and they take actual points. And then they create the contours by interpolating between those different points. So they did that with their initial submission. Their surveyor went out and, you know, worked and got some additional spot elevations in those areas of concern to generate the new contours. So the short answer is land development plans typically don't show those individual shots. We could request them, but again, you know, these are signed and sealed engineered plans by the applicant's engineer, and you know, he is certifying that the information he's providing is accurate. So
How different are they from the original?
they're very slightly different. I mean, again, the original submission, you know, it was very close to a couple small areas that might have been close to 20%, and now those areas are slightly greater, or, well, flatter than 20%. Let's say it that way.
Okay.
So again, I mean, without, you know, my firm going out and surveying it on our own, there's no, you know, all we can do is go by the information that's provided to us. And again, they're engineered plans. They're, you know, the engineer seals on there. They're certifying the information's accurate, and that's, we really have to accept that. Okay. Number 3, issue was raised regarding the impervious coverage for the terrace area. We agree that was incorrect, and the applicant has revised that, and we agree with the corrected number. Number 4 was regarding whether or not retaining walls for the garage are permitted to be in the front yard setback. We have discussed this matter with the zoning officer, and he has verbally told me that retaining walls are permitted in the front yard setback, so there's no zoning relief required for that. And then number 5, there was an issue raised last month about the topsoil stockpile. Technically, they're permitted to have it 35 feet high. They have agreed to reduce it down to 15 feet. So that's the limit of the comments I had in my letter. But I'll entertain any questions.
Again, I keep going back to the stormwater drainage thing. Is there any way that we can verify or do something so that if stormwater becomes a problem for people who are downhill, that they have action against, to bring action against I guess the owners, whoever, the association there, so that they can have that corrected? I mean, one of the issues that came up was one of the properties sort of down the hill has had water drainage problems because of stuff like that. Or is that not a reasonable thing to do?
Well, you can't, they would always have a cause of action under the Stormwater Management Act, but what they're going to have to do, and all the developments are doing, is execute a stormwater management agreement, which requires them to maintain, correct, repair the systems. Because over time, some of these systems get clogged up. They might need to be cleaned out. Township's a party to that. Township records that against the property, and there's an enforcement provision in there that the township would have the right to access, go on the property, make sure it's being maintained. So that's the cause. I mean, that's the enforcement under the Stormwater Management Act, and DEP requires it. O&M agreements, what I call O&M agreements for stormwater management, get executed for any new BMPs, any new facilities.
Suppose they have a 100-year storm or something like that, as theoretically designed for, and it turns out to not be working properly. It turns out that even if it's completely filled and so forth, they still get water in their basement or something like that. Is that
well, they're going to have an affirmative obligation under that agreement to maintain those, whatever gets approved by agreement with the township, they will have an affirmative obligation to maintain that in perpetuity. So, I mean, that's, if something happens as a result of, we have a lot of these 100-year storms, usually a couple a year. If something happens downhill, and and it's not being maintained, and that's the cause of it, then those residents are going to have a cause of action.
But if it's being maintained in accordance with the standards, but it still has a problem or an issue, what do the residents or the people who are affected have?
What do you mean? What kind of an issue?
Well,
it's not working properly. It wasn't designed properly.
The fact that this 100-year storm happens every year, and it needs to be designed for 200-year storm, but it's only designed for 100-year storm. That's the question, right? Yeah.
I mean, do they hold do they hold the township responsible? Do they hold the association responsible? Or do they hold the engineer designs it responsible? Or is there
could be all of the above.
Oh, that's
but
great.
It's going to be the landowner that's responsible for the system, and if it was designed effectively, it's going to be the engineer that designed the system.
All right. Thank you very much.
Any other questions for David or John?
I have a few questions. I should have asked this last month because it was confusing, and actually David just referenced it a few minutes ago. On page 1, sheet 1, where the impervious coverage summary is, it makes it confusing, so I'm curious why you did it this way. Why is it that you separated out the buildings and the porches in existing, but you
didn't separate them out in proposed, even given the question that came up last month about what porches are going to be left after development, is one of the project questions that was addressed in this month's letter. Why not just leave them separated out in proposed impervious coverage summary?
I understood the comment. I believe a neighbor made a comment suggesting that the porches should be included as part of the building coverage and not the impervious coverage. So I moved it into the building category to show that even if the porches were considered building area, the percentage of building coverage would still be much less than what's permitted by code. It was a worst-case scenario, if you will.
Why didn't you keep them consistent in both columns? That's my question. You put it together for proposed because of that reason. Why not put them together in existing so that we had a quick apples-to-apples comparison?
I can make that change. It's
I mean, it was a question why you didn't do it
because
that way.
I was looking at a worst-case scenario.
Okay. That was one question.
Stay on that for a second. So the porches are reducing?
No, see, it makes it look that way.
In the existing conditions table, I listed the porches separately. I didn't include them as part of the building area. In the proposed condition, I added them to the building area so that I wanted to calculate the worst-case scenario as far as the building coverage is concerned. And that number is well below the 30% allowable by code.
But why wouldn't those numbers equal? Why doesn't buildings plus porches equal proposed
porches
buildings?
Porches aren't necessarily buildings.
Okay.
They don't meet the definition of building by the Township zoning ordinance.
Which ordinance are you referencing?
Excuse me?
Which ordinance are you referencing?
The zoning ordinance. The definition of building.
Okay, keep talking. I have another. Did your question get answered?
I'm not sure. So we go to the first page, and you started with an 8,000 square foot building, and you're now at a 9,000 square foot building. Is the building getting larger?
No, I just moved if you look at that table, I moved the porches category into the building
Great.
category.
So it's 1,500 square feet.
So the building isn't getting larger, and the
Great.
porches aren't changing.
So why doesn't 8,000 plus 1,500 equal?
The difference is the garage is going to be demolished.
Okay, thank you. Now it answers my question.
Okay,
So the garages were part of the porches in the existing?
In the existing, the garages is part of the building. It has a roof and
Now I
4
get it.
sides.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I recall a conversation at a HARB meeting a long time ago that the steps to the west porch might be getting removed.
No,
That's not going to
staying.
happen.
They're staying on the plan.
That was actually one of the reasons we had to go back to the HARB, was to confirm that they're going to be left as an ornamental aspect of the mansion, because that's what there was question: are they going to be removed? Are they not going to be removed? We don't want them removed. As Cass says, I'll leave them. It's not going to be a functioning porch, but they will stay as an ornamental piece of the mansion. HARB said great. But that was one of the specific reasons we went back to the HARB, was to deal with those steps. So that was something that was specifically addressed.
And the other question I had on this page, if you could just clarify it for me, under General Notes, number 9, additional area of proposed right-of-way for Luella Court is hereby offered for dedication to Radnor Township. Is that the additional right-of-way you were giving just around the actual building?
There's a couple sections of sidewalk on the south side of the property where I needed to widen the right-of-way in order to keep the sidewalk within the public right-of-way. So it's several hundred square foot of additional right-of-way in order to construct the sidewalks.
And that's again reflected in the zoning tabulations that you did?
It is.
Okay. And then the other question I had on this page is, on the zoning tabulations, where are the proposed steep slopes that are post-construction? Where is the calculation for those?
There is no calculation required by your code for steep slopes after construction.
Is that clear?
Yes, agreed. I mean, this is to protect the existing steep slopes. My interpretation and, the zoning officer's interpretation is proposed steep slopes are not considered steep slopes that require protection. And that's why, you're allowed to disturb steep slopes if you can verify that they were created under an approved land development plan. So, I mean, proposed steep slopes, are not protected.
So are you going to, we're going to get that approval for the steep slopes for some future development so that, or something down the road, we could say, yes, these were done under this plan?
Yeah, I mean, we had it on Cabrini. I mean, Cabrini had some steep slopes that they chose to disturb, and we made them verify that there was an approved land development plan that supported those steep slopes that were created.
Well, that's my point. They're not being reflected in this plan. I don't see where the steep slopes that are getting created are being reflected in this plan so that later down the road, the applicant could show that the steep slopes that were created here were created under an approved land development plan.
When a new development plan is presented, a new survey of the property will be done. At that time, the steep slopes will be determined or decided or delineated.
Is that the way in which it'll happen?
Yeah, and if I understood your initial question is, you were indicating that the steep slopes should be subtracted out of the
I was
lot
wondering
area?
that. You're saying
Right,
that
and
they don't.
They do not, no.
Okay, but in terms of a grading permit and being part of this land development plan, they still have to be reflected somewhere.
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, again, if someone would develop this parcel in the future, and then a survey is done, and the steep slopes would be reflected by the survey, and they'd be picked up at that time, then a red flag might be raised and said, hey, you have some steep slopes here, and then it would be the applicant's responsibility to go back and pull out the approved grading plan and say, no, these steep slopes were created under an approved land development plan, and therefore we are allowed to disturb them.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to clarify one point I made on the steps. So it's not it won't remain a functioning entrance. That's what the steps were there for, so. The porch, the area will remain, right? It just won't be a functioning entrance to the building.
Because you indicate a walkway right up to it on page sheet 3. It looks like there's going to be a walkway right up to those steps.
That's the existing walkway, and the Shade Tree Commission or Harb asked us to maintain those existing sidewalks on that side of the building.
Okay, but you wouldn't use the stairs because the door is not going to, it will no longer be functioning. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Can I ask my parking question now? Okay. I'm allowed? Okay. On the parking analysis, where you have required 2 spaces per unit times 12 equals 24 spaces, 1 space per unit per 4 units times 12 equals 3 spaces. First, I don't understand the second line there, but anyway, your total is 27. But then you say proposed 27 spaces, including the parallel spaces, which I believe you said you're removing now. Is that correct?
Well, on the plans that you have, those spaces are still on there.
Okay, yes, I realize that.
When we remove those 3 spaces,
It'll be 24.
I would adjust that note.
But how many are required, 24 or 27? Because on the parking analysis, it says required 27.
And we'll be asking for a waiver for 3 of those.
For 3 of those?
Correct.
Okay.
So the required would be 24.
So 27 are still required, but you're providing 24?
With a waiver request for the other 3.
Okay. Now, I think somebody is shaking their head over there.
That's correct.
Which is correct?
What you just said is correct.
So 27 are required, and you're providing 24.
So this dealt with the initial issue that we had requested the determination. We actually made a 3-part determination request. One, we believed it was a pre-existing nonconformity, which they confirmed with respect to zoning. There are no overflow parking spaces on the property right now. There's actually deficient parking.
Okay.
So with that, they're in agreement, however. They've said this is a saldo requirement. So despite the fact that it's a pre-existing nonconformity, you must request a waiver with respect to that requirement, which is those 3 spaces. So pursuant to your saldo, the parking analysis is correct and your interpretation is correct. There are 3 additional spaces that would be required pursuant to your saldo.
Okay.
We're asking for the waiver that would remove that requirement.
So that you can eliminate those 3 spots?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I understand now.
David?
If I could put in my 2 cents. I wish you'd put the 3 back. and request a waiver for front yard parking.
Well, that front yard parking would be a variance, it wouldn't be a waiver.
Okay, I understand.
David, when the applicant submitted all these waivers, what was the stated hardship?
The waiver request came in with, I believe, do they have a copy of, do you have a copy of Mr. Falcone's letter, or?
I do. Waiver
Okay.
requests are supposed to be submitted with a hardship, and what's the hardship, and it can't be economic. So, and we're not really supposed to grant waivers without undue hardship, so I was just curious what the stated hardship, I mean, particularly the ordinance review 255-20B, but even the 255-27, oh, it's 29, I think I have to turn my page, 29A20. What was the stated hardship with the application?
Well, I'm sure David can speak to it, but their position is it's not a matter of a hardship, it's a matter of the fact that they're improving a nonconformity. So.
That's correct. So that, again, speaking to the letter specifically, it's an existing nonconformity, but Mr. Rice can confirm this or I guess deny it, but one of the clearest hardships when seeking a variance or any other relief is an irregular lot. This is truly an irregular lot as it has only front yards. There are no side yards or rear yards. So with respect to a hardship, it's that there are no side yards or backyards, rear yards. It's all front yard. We're being required to develop within a property which is completely surrounded by street. So that in and of itself is a hardship. But the fact that the spaces don't exist right now and we are improving a nonconformity with respect to parking, we believe that is going in the right direction with respect to the ordinance and its language, and we aren't expanding it. So we don't believe those parking spaces are necessary. But to specifically answer your question with respect to hardship, it's an existing nonconformity. You'd be asking us to improve beyond our determined nonconformity status, as well as a lot that's completely surrounded by front yard.
And what about the waiver request for 255-20B?
That's for the off-street parking.
No, that was actually for the significant man-made features, because one of the questions that we had tonight is the Waynwood. I'm curious if you had to have shown us the map and detailed the 500 feet, if you might have had a note about the question that came up about the parking at Waynwood. I mean, there's a purpose for the requirement to show this, and you know, just turning in a picture, an area view, it gives a lot of information, but it doesn't give some detailed information. So I was curious what the hardship was there.
So it's, we were actually informed that the picture we submitted was sufficient. We think it actually shows exactly what you're looking for. We're following township lead here. We think it's appropriate. We think other developers have done the same thing. Certainly if you want to hold us to a higher standard, then the hardship is not specific. It's that we believe this is sufficient information to allow for an appropriate review. With respect to this one provision, that would be our response.
No, just in this particular case, I wonder if it would have ultimately answered the question we had earlier about the Waynwood lot, whether, if there might have been a note here. Often you have detailed notes, so that's the reason I'm asking about that now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant? Township engineer or township solicitor?
If I could just make one
Go
final
ahead.
closing comment before public comment, and then I'm sure we'll have some responses. But this plan has not changed much in several months now, and we've been in front of different boards, and you know, we are honing in on what we believe is a complete plan, a final plan, a good plan, and we're taking every comment we get at every meeting and we're responding accordingly. Some of the comments we're receiving tonight we're going to digest, and we're going to move forward, hopefully, and address those. But to the extent with respect to Planning Commission comments, I don't believe I've heard anything that would deter us from seeking a request this evening based on this plan. Nothing that would we would be unable to address moving forward to a meeting in front of the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? Going once? Thank you. Scared me there for a second. Wake everybody up.
You had to know.
wasn't feeling well. We have some questions, points of clarification that for some things that maybe were missed in our questions and other ones that maybe were answered, but we didn't consider it to be a complete answer. So,
Introduce yourself.
oh,
and
I'm
address.
sorry, Susan Byrne from Luella Court. You were teasing me, I thought you knew. We have some open questions and points of clarification, and let's put this up in the big view. In some cases, there are questions that may have been missed in the series of questions, and in other cases, there are things that we didn't consider to be answered entirely. Cass, you had asked, or Judy Strimmel had asked if the building would be fully wrapped, and I don't know that it was clear when that would occur. So it sounded as if the wrap might be, the scaffolding may be encased afterward. We'd like to know at what point the wrapping goes up around the material, because it's an old building. We expect there to be a lot of toxins coming in the wind. So that's an open question. The next one is that in the footprint, that the soil stockpile area did change, and but it's going to be 15 vertical feet of soil, and it looks to me from a north-south perspective, it's only about 18 feet. So how do you put 15 feet of vertical on 18 feet of depth? That's one question. The next one is visitor parking, and we went through this. Obviously, the loading dock we think is a good thing to remove. The parking space is not so much, because we did pay close attention to Pembroke North, where they had to come back later on and buy another lot and put visitor parking in. That was their rationale for why the units didn't sell. And although I don't think they've all sold yet, I think they're selling more now. We don't want to see that parking go out to the street. Those lots, I think if you talk to the folks who just did the renovations at the Wayne Hotel, and some people in your building and some people in the building at Askin Point, they wouldn't want those spaces to be taken on as overflow for this development. Now, 25 is always quoted as the number of units that are in the building, but the reality is that several of those were used by Margaret Coe's restaurant for workers that did not have any cars at all. So some of them were transient workers, some of them came and stayed there and were actually really like functioning neighbors of ours, but none of them had cars. So that number is loose and fast, really, and I think it's going to require those visitor spots, and I think that's why it's in the code. But it is in the code, so it should be observed as such. And that causes them a problem, I understand, but we don't want it in the center of the circle. That's a disaster. And we have made it work now, because the nature of the people in the building now and the different apartments, the 25 units were studios, some of them. Quite a few of them were small. They didn't all require 2 parking spaces. So that would be another comment. The next question is, why do the survey results keep changing? And David, you alluded to it a little bit, and I'd like to look at 3 versions of the code of the drawings. I believe it's May, September, and November, and see where the impervious, where the contour lines changed, therefore the steep slopes were reduced. I can tell you that the slopes are steep, and you'll see later on how we've proven that. Jim, can we look at these drawings on the table for a second, please? You know what I'll do? I'll take out the middle example and just do the first and the last. I'll have to outline it with my hand. The gap that indicates a foot change in the May plan, is that large? The gap that indicates the same thing in the November plan, is that large? Doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's enough to kick it from steep to non-steep. I can pass these copies around. Would you like to see them? Not really. Okay.
Now, where do they come? The one on the left, is that from a set of plans that you had from way back?
Yes. Yeah, we have all the plans. I have all the plans. And there are many, many, many plans. There are a lot of them, a lot of different versions. So what we did is we went out to do an informal survey. Jim, if you can go back to the PowerPoint, please. And we did this before vertically to indicate things to the HARB. We took a level, a 5-foot pole, and a 1-inch mark pole, and that would give you a 20% slope, which is above what's considered steep slopes. And we found at least 8 areas that were greater than that. So here they are, as indicated by the index finger on the vertical pole. That's in the same area that I just pointed to on the drawings, and that's a 20% difference. That's near the pin oak. The next one is further west, closer to the closer to the pin oak, between the pin oak and the fir tree. That's about 1 inch more than the foot. That's at the curb in the southeast corner. My index finger, again, is the foot mark in the leaf. You know, it's 12 inches up in the leaves, and that's, I don't know what, another 5, 6 inches. So there's another one. Southeastern corner of the existing garage is another 1.5 inches above the foot, above the 20% slope. And then this one's even more. And that's further around the corner, further around the road. So I guess my question is, I mean, David, you explained it a little bit, is that they're pinpointing each time along, but this doesn't really, the reality is what the reality is. And if they're stamped engineered drawings, the reality is what the reality still is.
Susan, are you saying that the drawings that were stamped and engineered in May and in November also changed?
Yes, they changed
based on the
contour
pictures
lines.
that you showed.
Yes.
Okay, so and both were stamped and sealed, David?
Well, I can see where they're getting
I mean, I
closer.
can't,
This is a question.
excuse me, I can't speak to the May ones because I'm not sure what they would have been. I mean, obviously, this wasn't before you back in May.
I just was looking at the drawing. She had a date. If you could clarify
Right.
that date.
I mean, I
it's
don't
from the
know,
car.
you know, what the May plans were for, but.
We were at about 3 or 4 months of meetings before. I don't think they were stamped, but the last several were. We were at a bunch of meetings before we ever got where we needed to be here. We went all over the place. We probably had 16 meetings before we got where we needed to be at the choice of the applicant. The HARB, the Board of Commissioners, back to the HARB, back and forth and back and forth. So those are the versions that I have.
Yes, David, my question is, while Susan's looking, is have you compared 2 sets of stamped sealed where there are changes like this or not?
Well, again, I mean, the May plans, clearly they weren't land development plans, so I'm not sure, I'm not sure, you know, I wasn't even around back in May, so I'm not sure what they were for. But obviously, I have compared the November plans to the December plans, and, you know, they have changed, and with reasons that have been cited by the applicant. So,
Well, there's one, the plans, of course, has to change. As the plans get more fully vetted, they would be changing, but existing conditions.
well, that's what I should have said that more clearly. The existing conditions changed on the plans, as the applicant explained, because they did more detailed survey. I mean, as I tried to explain, and I'm probably not doing the best job, these existing contours are generated by points. And if the points are not taken at the best locations, or if they aren't taken close enough together, you're not getting the best picture, because all you're doing is interpolating between those points. And when an issue was raised, such as was raised last month, then the engineer goes back out and he focuses in on that area and takes additional shots to try to get a better picture. And that's what he's done, and that's why the existing contours have changed.
To me, these remind me of waves, going after each other on the sea. And I can see where the line of the wave would change, but I can't see where the contour lines would get further apart. There's a difference between refining the line and the smoothness of the line, which this yard is it's very, you should, if you haven't seen it, maybe you could come by and take a look. But I can't see the distance between the two lines changing consistently. Just my thought. We still have a question about whether the trash and fire vehicles can get into the garage in case there's a problem. I think what I'm seeing, in fairness to David, is that David is an engineer, and these issues need detailed zoning review. And I think that's part of the issue, because that would be like going to my dentist and asking about my tax returns. I don't always think that fits beautifully. So,
when you did your looked at the spots where you thought the steepest slopes were, and you measured them in the field, what did you come up with in terms of, what would you estimate was the amount of slopes that exceed 20% on the property, just from your own personal field work? And I know you didn't survey everything, but from what you did, what would your estimate be?
I'd be uncomfortable estimating that. But I know we took about 9 shots just, within about a 20-minute period. And the surface area that's involved is pretty substantial, because there's a big hill that runs between the front of the existing garage, around the property. I can't explain it. And it's pretty deep. And it's definitely greater than 14%. And in some cases, it's more than that.
David, is there some kind of a convention as to what distance you need to measure? Is it under this amount of distance? It can't exceed. What is steep over what distance? Because obviously if you measure it over this distance and it's steep, but then if it flattens out over this distance and it's not steep over a longer distance?
Well, unfortunately, Radnor ordinances are silent on that requirement. I mean, other municipalities have that requirement where it has to be over a 20-foot horizontal length, for instance. Right. We don't have that, so it's just sort of judgmental, and you just have to, the way I've looked at it is, and it might say specifically between 1-foot contours. So in other words, 1-foot contours can't be any closer than 5 feet together. There has to be a 5-foot separation between those 1-foot contours.
So that would mean that somewhere within that 5 feet there might be a steeper section. But if you're measuring between the contour lines and it's within the 20%, then it's counted. Is that the industry standard?
Right.
I mean, obviously, when anyone goes out to engineer a property, Susan's group as well as the applicant's group, you're never going to get a spot everywhere.
Right.
You're using some system, and if the industry standard is to take the 1-foot contours, I don't know if it was the 2-foot contours, the 1-foot contours.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what is normal.
There is not an industry standard. I guess the best thing to say is a 1-foot increment would be the most conservative way to look at it. I mean, no one would take a look at an area and look for steep slopes within a 6-inch vertical, separation, for instance.
We did 5 for that reason. And I think if we had been able, if we did that for the ease of mathematics, if we had been able, if we'd had a longer curtain rod, we could have found much steeper slopes. That's it.
Can we ask the applicant to address some of the procedural questions? The fire, access to the garage,
Thank you.
the building. Do you want to put them back up, Susan?
Oh,
If you shut them off, that's fine. Just address them again.
Which
I think there was 3, right? We have trash and fire, demolition.
Yes.
Stockpile.
And a stockpile. There were the 3.
Ed,
And the
would you add a
slopes.
question that
Sure.
had occurred to me last night? I meant to write it down. The height of the garage. What dawned on me last night, separate from Susan's question, was that because I saw a trash pickup today of a big dumpster, those big trucks, actually, you have to have enough height to go in, get the big dumpster, and pick it up over the truck to dump it in. So I was curious how tall the garage, I don't think I ever got an answer on how tall the garage is. And is there going to be room for a trash truck to go in and lift one of those, that's one of those big bins up and over into the truck to empty it? Because I think that's the kind of trash truck they're planning on using.
At some point down the road, too, I think we would all feel a lot more comfortable if we had some understanding of what the construction was going to be, how it was going to impact our ability to live and get around our own neighborhood. It's a very small street. There's a lot of dirt that has to leave. That stockpile area is on the farthest side, pretty much. Are we going to be able to get out and do what we need to do all the time? It's not merely inconvenient. That would be prohibitive, and I don't understand how that's going to be. So, thank you.
Angela?
I'll address a couple of comments. As far as the topsoil stockpile area, the note on the drawing says a maximum of 15 feet. Township has a standard detail in their ordinance that says the maximum stockpile height can be 35 feet. We had that standard note on our plans originally. We revised that to 15 feet. In our case, I don't expect this topsoil stockpile area to exceed 6 feet. Okay? The note says a maximum of 15 feet, but within the area that we have available for topsoil, we can only get a 6-foot high topsoil stockpile area, which will be more than enough for what we need to save for the project. All right, so there's no intention of building a 15-foot high stockpile area. As far as the surveys go, okay, we submitted 2 land development plans to the township. We submitted in October, submitted in November. The contours changed with the November plans based upon the additional surveys that we did. Let me explain to you how the contours are generated. Survey crew goes out and get a series of shots, which are elevation shots. Okay, we have a computer program that takes those elevation shots and calculates the slopes, interpolates the slope lines between those elevations. There were a couple points that during that surveying process, we also locate trees. And it happens that the spot elevations for the trees were in with the elevations shots for the topo. In a particular case where we went back to resurvey, there's a 36-inch oak tree where the computer used the spot shot for the tree to calculate some of the slopes in that area. And that's why we went back to make an adjustment, because the shot on the tree is on top of the roots, because we have to get as close to the tree as possible in order to get an accurate location for the tree. So the elevation at that tree is about 7 inches higher than the ground, a foot away from it. So when we went back out, we took the ground elevations in front of the tree, and that resulted in an adjustment in those contours. And we're only talking an area. We only surveyed an area that was roughly 20 by 30. And that's the only adjustments we've made to contour lines. And it goes back to the data that the computer program used to generate the contours to begin with. And the reason we did that is because it was raised as an issue last month. So we felt it important enough to go back and check those elevations, which we did.
Go right ahead.
One other thing I want to point out, and I'm just pointing it out. If you look at the definition sections of your ordinance, there's a definition for steep slope. And Mr. Lay is right. There's nothing in here that says that the slope has to be continuous over 3 contours or such language that other townships has. But it does define a steep slope as a slope that exists at 20%, and then in parentheses it says 2 feet measured over 10 feet. Okay? I would submit to you that definition of steep slope requires the slope to be at least 2 foot high, not 1 foot high. I believe our architect is going to answer the question about access to the garage.
Great.
I'm Tim Wentz with Gate 17 Architecture. With regards to fire access into the garage, we have designed many residential buildings with both underground parking and above-ground parking structures, and we have never been required to have access for a fire truck inside the garage. I would also like to tell you that when we do go in for building permits, these drawings will be reviewed by the fire marshal, and we will provide whatever he requires to fight any type of a fire. Typically, parking garages only have an 8'2" clearance, which is more driven by handicap van access than it is for fire vehicles. With regards to trash collection, the dumpsters that are collected inside, that collect the trash inside the garage, are brought outside where they are picked up by the actual trash vehicle. The trash truck itself does not go inside the garage.
So you're not using one of those big bins? I think that, correct, did we all envision one of those big metal bins in the garage basement?
Right, they're probably going to roll it out.
So you're going to use rollout bins is what?
Well, what we'll be using is what the trash company, we'll be working with the trash company to determine what type of bin they will have. But if they are going to be the type of bin that's swung over top of the truck, that they will be dragging that outside, and then the trash truck will actually come down the ramp, throw the trash bin over top, and then pull back out.
Okay, thank you.
Who's going to move that thing?
Trash
I
men-
tried to move those things myself, and they're really...
No, they are movable. They are movable, and the trash men do that.
So, where in the parking garage is that going to be? I have this drawing.
The dumpster? Where's the dumpster going to be in the parking garage?
What entrance is that trash truck going to, where is that thing going to be, where the trash truck's going to get to it? Is it going to have, they're going to have to cover the entire length of the parking garage? And then the next question is, if you're moving it to someplace, quote, outside where the trash truck can get to it, how long is it going to be there before the trash truck arrives? Are you going to put it out there 7 o'clock in the morning, the trash truck's going to come at 1 o'clock?
No, in both of Kaz's buildings in Wayne, the trash men themselves are the ones that come in to the trash room and pull the actual dumpster out. If you look at the plan right here, this is the trash room. You'll see an overhead door which is outside of the garage. That overhead door comes up, the container comes out into the driveway, and then the trash truck picks it up.
We have that situation in our business. We have 2 dumpsters, and they roll them out. One guy can roll them out, and then the truck picks it up. It's not a biggie. I mean, it's hard for me to do it, but I'm not doing it.
It's a logical question, thank you.
The demolition of the building or the renovation of the building, as far as will the building be covered, scaffold? Can we get a little more definition on that?
Good evening, Cass Holloway. As I stated at the last meeting, the phasing of the demolition will commence with the interior demolition. We will provide dumpsters with covered chutes for that material to be collected in the dumpsters. Once we're done on the inside, which there won't be any windows removed. Everything will be done inside. Wherever there's negative air required, that'll be done. It'll all be done according to DEP requirements. Once that is done, we will put scaffold up on the outside of the building and wrap the scaffold, the entire building. And then we will do the roof, stucco, and remove the windows, replace windows, renovate, restore the stucco, and redo the roof. Once then, and only then, the scaffold will come down and the building will be totally restored. We will then put the stormwater system in and build the underground garage. The reason we're doing it this way is so that we are very cognizant that people are living on the street. We have an acre of ground. At 102 Luella, we only had 7,000 square feet. By doing it this way in this phasing, we can provide access onto the site. All of the subcontractors can park right on the existing parking lot that exists on the property right now, so that we can get the major demolition and renovation done to the building prior to even commencing with the underground garage. So I think we have it pretty well mapped out to make this as orderly and non-disturbance for the neighbors as possible.
Kaz, let me ask you the question. You talked in the last meeting about a potentially an 18-month construction period, and we all know we've got neighbors all the way around the property. You've been doing this your whole career and very successfully. How do you communicate with these neighbors during that process? Will you be telling them demos starting? Will you be limiting hours? You'll be working past 5 o'clock during the workday. Will you be working Saturdays and Sundays? Other than the residents coming in, complaining to the township or coming to your construction office, will you set up some sort of communication, whether it's email or, like on a Facebook thing, say, here's the construction, here's the phasing, here's what's going to be happening? How do we help that communication? 'Cause I know that's a big concern of all the residents.
No, absolutely. We actually did the same thing with Steepleview when we restored what everybody knew as hollyhocks, Rochelle's, and Lucky Duck. We kept in touch with all our business neighbors during that process on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis. If anything was going to affect a neighbor's business, or even at that time, Lucky Duck was a tenant. And we did not construct over Lucky Duck from October 15th to December 25th after 10 o'clock. So we only built above the Lucky Duck building from 7 to 10 every day, and then we moved to other areas of the building that did not have tenants underneath. Okay, so that was a very specific case. 102 Luella, we did the same thing. We had St. Mary's Church across the street. We had the Argus Printing, the dry cleaner, Petit Delis, all of those tenants that were neighbors that were right on the alleyway. Many days, we talked to them 2 or 3 times a day to let them know if we had a delivery coming, or to see if they had a delivery coming, to make sure that we did not impact them. So yes, the answer is yes. We will also be putting a construction fence around the entire property, so that for safety, because we don't want children going in there at night. It'll be locked. Our personnel will be the first ones on site in the morning to open the gate, make sure that our subcontractors come on site. Then we can close the gate, so everything's contained. So we will keep in close contact with our neighbors, and we want this to go as smoothly and as quickly as they do. Okay?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think you addressed all of Sue's questions, so we're back for public comment. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. Please.
My name is Judy Strimmel. I'm a resident on Luella Court. I'm still unclear when the garage gets built where all the construction vehicles are going to be parked. Is there an answer to that?
We'll ask the questions when you're done. Is that your only issue?
Well, no, God, no. But it's the only one I have at this moment. Thanks.
Cass?
I believe I answered that at the last meeting, but I will answer it again. When we were building at Steepleview and at 102 Luella, if we had a situation where there was just no place to park, we actually went to the police station and we were able to rent bags. This was whether we had to had a crane on site or whatever. By doing all the major demolition to the building first, it accomplishes two things. All the subs are able to be on the site while that process is going on. Once that is done, it allows the building to be unfolded, and from a resident standpoint, both the neighbors on 102 Luella and everybody in Wayne will be able to see the finished product long before we actually move people in, because we can't occupy the building until the entire project is complete. So the number of cars that we will need to build the garage, the number of trucks, the number of subcontractors will be much smaller than the work that will be going on prior to that. And with the parking lot next door, there are metered parking spaces there. I just want everybody to know, I think you'll find when you check that out, you'll see that there's, I think, 20 permit spaces, and then there's 22 or more metered spaces. We would do the same thing. We would, actually what we did at 102 Luella, we actually gave our subcontractors quarters every day and gave them quarters for the meters to park in the public parking space. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Sir?
Hi, Baron Gemmer, South Wayne Avenue. Just about 5 quick points here. Revisiting the steep slope more from an administrative standpoint, one of the things that may have helped and is still a requirement of the plan is under the zoning 28112, the steep slope section, which you referred to in terms of the protection. But under B and C, let me just read it. Any applicant for a building permit, preliminary subdivision plan approval, or preliminary land development plan approval, which is this preliminary/final, on land which contains area with a grade or slope of 14% or more shall be required to have the limits of such areas defined by a registered professional engineer. And then it goes on to explain that it needs to be the 14% area and the 20% area. So that really should have been on both the last plan and this plan, and that would help point out the issues we're looking at now. So that is a deficiency. That's actually a zoning deficiency in the land development plans. Regarding the overflow parking, it's been mentioned that those were a pre-existing non-conforming condition, which is really not even close to the truth, quite frankly, because number one, they are a SALDO requirement, not a zoning requirement. And secondly, if you read the SALDO requirement, it's a requirement when your other parking is in a private garage situation. The current conditions are all surface parking where there is no private parking, so it wouldn't have applied anyway. So on both of those counts, to call it pre-existing is just nonsensical. Back to what Susan mentioned about Pembroke North, and let me just give you a little more detail of the history there. When they went through subdivision by the prior township engineer's own admission after the fact, he missed this requirement. And so they needed about 14 extra spots beyond the 2 per because they have underground parking there, and they only provided 4. And as Susan alluded to, in spite of the fact that the Acme parking lot was very close, they have a nice sidewalk there, and we've talked about parking that's close to Luella, that was a problem from them. And so they end up having to buy another parcel, the R5 that abuts Lancaster Avenue, and consolidate that lot and put that parking there. And I think now, instead of the 14, they might have 16 overflow. So they're basically now in compliance after going through all that. So let that be a lesson that these overflow parking spaces are important. They even had some, and they had the Acme parking lot nearby, and it was still a problem. So I would highly recommend, particularly in such a compact area, that not be overlooked. That can just be more than problematic. Along those lines, if those are put in, one of the things we didn't see in the plan with the parking spots under 25529 A5, where it talks about that there also needs to be a planting strip between the parking area and the right-of-way. In the plans, we've seen the proposed parking spots, but they've never complied. They did not comply with that section of Saldo where there needs to be a buffer there. They can't just have the sidewalk and then the parking lot, those 3 parking spots. One of the issues that was that I brought up last meeting and was, I guess, attempted to be resolved in David's letter. And let me just put this down and I'll speak to it. Thanks, Jim. These are in red, but you really can't see. What the issue that was supposedly resolved by the engineer's letter was, okay, the retaining walls are fine. There's no problem with those. Well, I brought up 2 types of issues. I brought up those, but the more important ones are the non-retaining walls, the actual walls of the garage, which by extension, because of the way R4 defines accessory structures attached to it, is part of the building. These walls here, which have the garage on the other side, and this wall here, which also has the garage on the other side, are in the front yard setback. They are not retaining walls. They are walls of the garage, which, as we said, is defined as an accessory structure, and R4 explicitly says any accessory structure attached to the building is considered part of the principal building. And so that has not been resolved as far as I've seen from the comments from the township engineer.
Barron, could I just interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
Because I was negligent in not pointing out what you had mentioned to me. Regarding that matter, I talked to the zoning officer, and he said that is not an issue because that area will not have a roof on it, so it is not considered part of the building. Because the definition of a building requires it to have a roof.
Well, let me address that on a couple points. One is, yeah, this wall is attached to the roof right there. This is the wall that has a roof on top of it, just like this wall has a roof on top of it.
But that portion's underground. The portion that's above ground does not have a roof on it.
I'm not following you. The roof follows this outline.
And that part is underground.
Well, this is not underground. It's visible from the street.
Yeah, but that doesn't have a roof on it. That's what I'm saying. That area that you see from the street does not have a roof on it.
That's like saying I have a cubicle house with sod on top of it, and it's underground, but I can still see the wall.
Maybe I'm not explaining it clearly, but the area that doorway is, the way I interpret the plans and the way the zoning officer interprets the plans, and the applicant, correct me if I'm incorrect, but that area does not have a roof on it.
I'm not, well, yeah, that's right. An exterior wall will only have a roof to one side of it. I'm not talking about this area here. I'm talking about the walls on both sides, which are the walls of the building, just like this is a wall of the building. It doesn't have a roof on this side of it, but it has a roof on that side of it. It's supporting the roof on one side of it, just like all exterior walls typically do.
All I can say is the zoning officer has ruled that is not.
Well, look, I just want to be careful because it said retaining walls in your description, and these are not retaining walls. So that's why I want to know what he has ruled on.
Right, there is a retaining wall in the front area there.
Yeah, these are retaining walls here.
Correct. And
Yes.
it was my understanding that was what one of the items that was
One of
under
the items.
discussion last week.
That's
So
correct.
that's what I was addressing.
Okay.
So
the others have not been addressed then?
No, I'm sorry. Like I said, in my initial comments, I only addressed the retaining walls. I was negligent in not mentioning what I just mentioned now, which is that Bill has also taken a look at that area that we just discussed, that you just brought up, and based on the fact that it has no roof, it is not considered a building.
I'm not following your no roof. All exterior walls only have a roof on one side of them.
Baron, your issue is that it's in the front yard setback?
Yeah, it's in the front, it's not underground, it's in the front yard setback. It's clearly visible from the road.
And I mean, Bill looked at this as being whether or not it was a problem at its location. I mean, we can relook at this with him, but I know, these are man doors, right?
Correct.
I'm sorry, what was the?
They're doors?
This is a pedestrian, well, no, this is this is the door here.
like
These are
an
the walls
access?
to get out of the door.
Okay. Yeah, I know he looked at it, and I know he disagreed with you. But we'll get some more information from him.
Okay, thank you. That's not the last point. Thank you for that.
May I ask a clarification for his comment? Okay. What walls are you talking about?
Oh, certainly. Let me, Angela, let me show them to everybody. Not having a private conversation. Angela asked what specifically walls, and here's the door, these walls that are in red on the side there, which are still walls of the garage, not the retaining walls that come out from the garage, but actually the wall of the garage, which has parking spaces on the other side, and this has the trash on the other side of it. So it's part of the structure, not merely retaining soil like these are and those are. That's correct, yes. Oops, sorry about that. Back to a point you actually did address, and I'll let them finish up a second here. With the impervious cover, and they got corrected some of the transpositions, and I haven't checked the others, but I'll assume that those are correct. I just want to give you a little bit of the history of why looking at some of the impervious cover calculations and things are important. Let me give you the last four that I have: July, August, October, November, the plans, the proposed impervious cover percentage. In July, the plans submitted were 23.21. In August, it went up to 27.84. In October, it was 34.48. And now in November, it's 37.9, with the max being 40. So it's been steadily increasing, either through different calculations or with the parking. So they are getting close to the max. So little things can make a huge difference in that, which is why bringing up the other issue was important. One of the things that I am going to, I guess, disagree with David on here is not the, and again, I haven't checked all the calculations to make sure the area of the actual impervious cover is correct, but the denominator has a way to calculate it, which I think if you look at the first page of one of the plans, they talk about how they calculate the lot area, and you see how they take out the right-of-way. I believe someone asked about that in terms of subtracting that out and whether that was right-of-way because of the parking spaces or not. But in the definition of lot area, so this is just the definition of lot area from the Saldo. Number 4 is what they've been doing, the land area within existing public right-of-ways located within any R1 through R6, basically. So you need to subtract those out. You also need to subtract out 75% of the 100-year floodplain and 75% of the wetlands. And then the fourth, which happens to be number 3 because I skipped around, you need to subtract out of the lot area is 75% of the slopes equal to or in excess of 20% of the area not within the 100-year floodplain and wetlands. So they don't want you to double count it, so that's why they're saying not do it in there. But this is not the protection clause. The protection clause is 281.12 within zoning that talks about when you can or can't disturb them. this is how to calculate the lot area, and it makes absolutely no distinction for the steep slopes. It says steep slopes. So if you have existing ones, they would come into play here. If you create ones, they would come into play here, because this relates to runoff and not specifically stormwater per se, but this is how the code says you need to calculate the lot area. And again, with being so close, this can make a huge difference in the calculation. Now, David may want to respond to that.
I want to respond to that. Why would you be looking at the proposed plans at all when you're calculating the building area of an existing site?
In terms of calculating the impervious surface coverage, it's all the impervious areas over the lot area. And this is telling you how to calculate the lot area. You do it both before to see if you're non-conforming to begin with, and you've seen those numbers. And then you also do it afterwards. You have to see, if you're doing a subdivision, you need to make sure you have enough lot area for them separately. Yes. Yeah, I apologize if I did. But you could have, actually where I did mix, if you did have existing steep slopes, which couldn't be disturbed, they would be a part of your existing, and they'd be a part of your proposed, along with any steep slopes you're also creating. They would be part of this number you put in there, because you wouldn't be able to do anything with them short of a variance. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like me to respond, I mean, I agree with Barron in the fact that this section is very silent on what steep slopes it's referring to, but it's a very common requirement. I've seen it in many other municipalities, and the understanding is they apply to existing steep slopes. You're trying to take out the natural resources. I mean, that's why you should take out the wetlands and floodplains and things of that nature, because those are natural resources that you're trying to protect. Similarly, you're trying to protect existing steep slopes, and that's the way it's always been interpreted. That's my interpretation. The zoning officers, and John's right here, I don't want to speak for him, but I believe he agrees as well that you do not subtract out proposed steep slopes, only existing steep slopes.
Let me, before John may want to still read a second, let me just comment on that. The protection for those areas are in other clauses. The protection for steep slopes is in 281.12. The protection for wetlands is elsewhere. This is based upon what's going to be there, regardless of how it got there. Now, obviously, you don't create wetlands out of the blue, and the fact that it's silent means it has to be determined that it is any type of steep slope. Because if you go to 281.12, it actually does make a differentiation, not between man-made per se and natural, but it makes a distinction between ones created as a result of the zoning ordinance and anything else. So other parts of the code do make distinctions. So the fact that this makes no distinction, a steep slope is a steep slope no matter how it got there. Man-made 100 years ago, naturally occurring, or man-made as part of the plan. John doesn't want to weigh in.
Very novel interpretation. I mean, you start with what's there, and the way I read this, Barron, that's how you start with the lot area, against which you then apply all the other regulations. I mean, to say that if you create steep slopes, you've got to go back and sort of double dip, what's created, and leave that separate would be, and there's nothing in this ordinance that says that you should do that.
Yeah, well, but
other than your interpretation.
Yeah, well, no, you look at even how they did the calculation here.
No, but if you want to say that you have to count the steep slopes post-construction, it's got to say that in the ordinance somewhere, because I've never seen a provision in any zoning or subdivision ordinance. And the purpose of the steep slopes or any environmental regulation is what's on the land now. Some ordinances have wetlands, forests, steep slopes, and you pull that land out, and that can't get built on, or maybe can only get built on by a certain percentage.
Yeah.
So, but to then come back after the fact and say that if you've created steep slopes because of the construction, now that's got to be set aside somehow.
Well, basically, the lot area calculation needs to be done, existing and proposed, and just by you use that same lot area definition for proposed. That's why there's a difference between the two, because they changed the right-of-way. So the right-of-way part changed of this.
But it doesn't say proposed anywhere in these regulations.
Well, when you calculate the proposed impervious cover, you take the total proposed impervious square footage over the proposed lot area. You don't take it over the original lot area.
Right, but that's not a natural feature. That's how much paving or blacktop is on a piece of ground and what you're leaving unpaved or unbuilt. Slopes are a natural feature, which under the MPC, it calls out in one of the sections of Article 6 that you can create regulations to protect and preserve existing natural features, and steep slopes would be one of those. So to go back and say that you've now got to do some other calculation or set aside what you're creating, sort of turn that on its head, I think.
I'm not following how it's turning it on its side. When you're doing the subdivision, if you're putting, just like you're changing the right-of-way changed, so that was a different calculation for the lot area using those exact same parameters. So if the steep slopes changed, you would change that part of the calculation too.
But that's the way it's done, I mean, throughout the state, through everything, and that's kind of our history of calculating it. And I agree with John, I mean, it would have to state in there specifically post, construction, or post, and I just don't know how we can go about changing how we've always done it consistently and how the rest of the world does it consistently for this one specific instance, despite whether you may theoretically be correct.
Yeah, well, I understand that, and obviously there's case law that says even if you've been doing it wrong all along, you still need to follow the code. But it doesn't say, where does it say you need to do post-construction right-of-way to change that?
I think we're going to have a lawyer bring it to court to get that resolved. I don't think we're going to be done
appreciate your
here.
comment,
Yeah.
and I was just trying to say that in the other section, it's doing, in the other of the four, one of them we're changing. Why wouldn't the other?
Yep.
So, all right, let me move on then. Oops. Last item, I'm sure John will want to weigh in on this one too, but and yes, don't adjust your sets. This is not the plans in front of you. This is Pembroke North. This is another issue that relates to Pembroke North. If you look at Pembroke North, they actually have an underground garage below these three buildings with offsets. And here, from this angle, if you're looking at the rear of the building, these offsets here are all at ground level. And
Baron, just say that last sentence again.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that. They're all at ground level. If you're looking, you could walk right from here, right on top of those. And then the buildings are there, even though there's a garage and another, actually in some cases, another floor below that. And they are landscaped to some extent, as they talk about, they mention there. Those were considered impervious in these plans. And in talking with David last week, I have yet to see where the township has made any ruling that this garage is pervious, because I look at the definition of impervious surface, and beyond the two-parter, one that surfaces that do not absorb rainwater, and then it talks about specific things that are considered impervious surfaces, which are old buildings, which is considered because it's attached to the principal building, and parking areas and driveways. And just like in the current plans, the existing conditions where you look at the garage and then the gravel area, the gravel will absorb some water. It doesn't fall into the first part of that definition. It falls into the second, all parking areas. That's why the plans say this is impervious, and that's the way we've done that. The ordinances make no allowance or no special allowance per se for green roofs like we have at the middle school and things like that, or in this case, which is a partially green roof over at Pembroke North. It still falls under our definition of old, in this case, double old building areas and old parking areas. And I think one of the things that has gotten lost is because this has taken so long going through HARB and Shade Tree or whatever, that there's been some assumptions that, oh, we've got the stormwater managed, but impervious is a whole different set of regulations. Somewhat related, but they still have to be satisfied independently. And the kind of the mindset was, well, how would we have gotten this far if they weren't considered pervious? But yet, I have yet to see any ruling that says anything to that effect. And here we have a case at Pembroke North where they were considered impervious, even though they were at ground level with landscaping, with garage and building below them.
I'm sorry, you're looking for a response?
If you'd like. It's up to you.
Sure. I mean, looking at the zoning ordinance definition, I look at the first sentence, And the first sentence for impervious surfaces, surfaces that do not absorb rainwater. So my position is, my opinion is, that this surface does absorb rainwater, being as there is a soil structure there, and it does absorb the water. So from a zoning standpoint, I think it clearly is pervious. It's not impervious. And then from a subdivision land development, stormwater standpoint, we have to make sure that the stormwater is dealt with. The applicant's engineer has accounted for what is happening with that water in his stormwater report, and is, showing a reduction of I believe the number is 32% of post-development stormwater runoff. So again, from a Saldo standpoint, the stormwater is being taken care of, and again, in my opinion, from a zoning standpoint, this is not an impervious surface.
Let me just respond to that. I'm not arguing the stormwater portion of it. Again, these are separate ordinances that have to be satisfied independently. I'm just talking about the impervious. I do disagree with David's interpretation of impervious surface, because as you mentioned before, old buildings, even in the case of Pembroke North, old parking areas have always been considered impervious because they're part of the definition. It's a two-parter. And just like the gravel is considered impervious, even though it absorbs water, I mean, the unfortunate conclusion that could be left here is that a homeowner who actually doesn't have to go through Saldo and go through stormwater, I could dig up my entire front yard, put a basement in, put an inch of sod on that, satisfy David's requirements according to that absorbing water, and just watch the floods go down the street. Or, something ludicrous like put sponges on my gabled roof, and those absorb water, and guess what? I've got the stormwater under that to manage it, because it's going to go on my regular roof and then go through the gutters. So just because it's absorbing water on the top, it would still be a building in my case and would fall under that second part of that. And if you want to look similar, structure has a two-parter too. It talks about, just so you can see that, it talks about an assembly material, form, and construction for use, and it says including yada, yada, yada. And then at the end, it has a second part, any man-made object having an ascertainable stationary location on or in land or water. Well, there's some things that would fall in one and not the other. And so they overlap greatly, but there are some that are in one, not in the other, in both cases. In the case of impervious surface, I think you're going to see that same thing. So you might have a building that can absorb water, but it still, for our ordinance, should be considered impervious.
John, the middle school, it has a green roof, right? A small part of it. Was that portion, was the entire building calculated for the impervious on that? You all approved the project. I wasn't here.
Yeah, that's before my time.
Okay. All right.
I think Matt Bauman gave that interpretation a long time ago, Baron. I mean, you may have not seen it, but it came up early on.
In writing? Because we've looked.
I'm looking.
I've looked at all of Matt's writings, because we've thought about this for a long time, so we certainly would have.
It was absolutely discussed early on. It was raised at the same time. The question came up is whether or not this was a land development, because of what was occurring inside. So, and whether or not there was a front yard setback requirement because of the garage being underground.
Yeah, the letter deals specifically just with the front yard setback. Let me tell you too, the early on, when it was before Harb and Matt was looking at it, it was still above ground garages with two different styles. And then what was at issue was the driveways, because they wanted to use just pavers and not count the whole thing as impervious because of the calculations. But I've never seen anything in writing nor heard from Matt that he's made any ever made any decision on the imperviousness of it.
I'm just trying to recall some of the conversations, because there was a lot of issues early on, and that was one of the things that came up. I mean, I disagree with you. It's, this is not a surface building. It's underground. And what's on top of it's going to absorb stormwater. I think under the zoning definition, it's not an impervious surface, that garage, which is.
In taking that to the extreme, what couldn't do on my own personal property to accomplish the same thing then? I mean, that's.
You can come up with a lot of extreme examples, but there's a lot of things that are underground, right underground. You can go to a cemetery. There's a lot of things right underground. Is that impervious? We're going to calculate the size of every thing that's underground, there's utilities underground. There's pipes
Well,
underground.
no, actually, but remember, what I'm going by is the definition that says old buildings and parking areas. I'm not extending it to those other things.
Well, I'm just, I don't know where that's, I'm just looking at the definition of impervious surfaces.
Yeah,
of
that's
the
what all
zoning
I'm looking at.
ordinance.
And then it goes on, it's, again, a two-part definition where it also specifies additional items.
All buildings.
Old buildings, parking areas.
Right, but the first sentence says that surfaces that do not absorb rain.
And it was just, that's why I was bringing up the thing about structure, which is also a two-part definition where some things will fall into one and some things will fall into the other, and they're not they don't overlap totally. And this is also a case, and that's why I brought up Pembroke North, where it is underground from the back and it's landscaped, but it was considered impervious, and that wasn't that long
And
ago.
I mean, I'm not familiar with that,
Okay.
but just looking at this, we're going to disagree.
Fair enough.
No.
That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Cheryl?
In light of what John said earlier about the steep slopes, et cetera, being, having to do with protection of natural features, so many inches of soil do not relate to being pervious. The deeper thought behind something being pervious is to have that water percolate through the earth. And in this case, the water that falls on this much soil does not percolate through the earth.
Where's it going to go?
It's going to wet that to the point of saturation and then continue away. It's not going to percolate through the earth there.
Right.
So if you're going to hold that standard, it should be held across the board, the slope idea and the water idea. The reference that I believe it's you, David, makes to a green roof, there's a specific concept in a green roof that this does not fit into. A green roof, as exists, as Susan said, in the middle school, is a structure that absorbs much more water than this will absorb. It is structured in order to have material underneath it that is very absorbent and material on top of it that absorbs water and dries up in between and then absorbs not only the water underneath but has some surface action also. This is going to be grass. By that definition, this kind of green, this is not a green roof. And I know that you may say that our ordinance does not have the words green roof in it. This is all part of why we have this lag period of things not being modern in it. But if you're going to use that, then we should keep it specific to what the industry standard is for what a green roof is, and not whatever you want to call it.
Right. Well, I guess...
I mean, I can call my front porch roof a green roof because it has moss on it. I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're not comfortable calling it a green roof, we really don't have to. I mean, that's what I was trying to get. I mean, there's two issues. There's the zoning issue, which is what I was saying. You know, I view this as pervious surface based on zoning because the surface is a pervious surface. I agree with you that the water is going to go through the surface and being collected by a system underneath and carried away, and that's where the stormwater management has to be addressed, which the applicant has. He's treated the stormwater that falls through that surface, and he's answered the question, what happens with that runoff? You know, how is it handled as it leaves the site? So again, from a stormwater management standpoint, they've addressed that.
I understand what you're saying. Now, do you understand this is like a swimming pool? You know, in our ordinance, have you seen that our ordinance addresses how much impervious swimming pools are considered?
Why? I mean, I wouldn't consider it a swimming pool.
Is it considered
because
impervious?
Yes. Okay. The sides and the bottom are impervious. Nothing's going to get underneath that to infiltrate the earth.
I was under the impression that swimming pools are considered pervious, and the reason
No, they're not.
and the reason is because the water doesn't flow downstream.
Yeah, but it
They're
overflows.
not, but and that water is not soaked. All those walls prevent it from getting in there, and the bottom of it prevents it from soaking into the ground.
But I was under the impression with this that they were going to take care of the storm water for the entire site to satisfy those our requirements. So all the if your concern is stormwater management, based on the engineers are telling us that they've addressed properly the stormwater management concerns. That's what they've said. I understand we're in a little bit of a catch-22 because you're trying to define, you're trying to say that a green roof is going to do stormwater management for you, so therefore,
Green roof will not.
and this kind of green roof will not, but they've have another stormwater management system to accomplish that goal. So to me, I get your point, and your point is very well taken. It is a little bit of a gray area. So, I mean, do
we wait until the people on Midland Avenue have to sue the township because the stormwater hasn't been protected adequately? That's what I'm worried. I mean, I don't want a catastrophe to happen and us go, oh my God, we should have thought about that differently. That's why I'm bringing these things up. I'm not bringing it up to be nasty. I'm not bringing it up to hurt you. I'm just.
Well, I think actually, Cheryl, they weren't counting this as 100% pervious in the calculations, as I recall. The engineer mentioned they. What was it that you counted the roof as? Wake up.
Our initial assumption was that the roof was impervious.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And then we calculated the runoff based upon that.
It would retain a certain amount of water, but you're counting it as impervious.
It would hold 2 inches of water based upon the green roof
because little egg
structure
crates and everything underneath.
I just want to point out, we gave you guys an hour-and-a-half lecture last time about what we're building on this green roof. This is a green roof. It's not just somebody throwing grass on top of the roof.
Now, there's stuff underneath it, Cheryl.
I mean, this
like
is a
little egg
legitimate
crates and
green
stuff
roof
like
construction. So, as I was saying, that green roof structure will hold so much water. The rest is going to run off.
But you calculate it
and we
as
analyze it that way.
impervious
Right.
in your calculations.
Correct.
Okay.
That is not clear in this.
Can I just jump in for a second? That I think, and Cheryl, thank you for all that. That was great. I think what we lost sight of here is that ultimately Barron's saying that, and I know I don't have possession of it, and yet we have possession of 2 letters tonight from Bill Miller. We don't have a letter from the zoning officer determining whether or not the parking is as Barron says or as John says. And if he's at 37.9 now, separate from stormwater management, R4, you can't develop over 40% impervious. So we need a determination from the zoning officer about a written determination from whether or not the parking is as Barron says or as John says, because the project just doesn't meet the impervious coverage limits.
I would ask that actually the engineer calculate.
It's really a
that,
township
not the
engineer's
zoning
call.
officer.
It's a township engineer's call.
How is that?
The percentages.
And if you look at the definition of impervious surface, it lists the surfaces, and then it says other surfaces as determined by the township engineer. So it kind of defaults to me.
But it's not an other surface, isn't it? It's parking, which is defined as impervious. And I don't think his impervious numbers include the parking garage. I mean, isn't that the 37.09 doesn't include that, right?
But I think from a zoning standpoint, we're talking about the surface, and that's the thing. There's no impervious surface at the surface. There's no concrete at the surface. The surface is grass.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding what Barron's comment was, but he's in the back, so I'm sure he'll clarify. All right.
So if I could just address this. Now, this issue, as John said, is not a new issue with respect to zoning, and we discussed it at the last meeting. There are definitely two different ways in which impervious needs to be calculated in this process. One, for zoning requirements. That has been opined upon by now John, Peter, and Matt in public forum at open meetings, both in front of this commission, in front of the zoning board, in front of the board of commissioners, in front of the HARB. I don't know if it was in front of the shade tree, but you can go back and watch, and they all have made the same determination. The language is not ambiguous. The ground absorbs water. So for that zoning perspective, this is pervious. We shifted to the land development phase, and Barron's made many points this evening that there are definitely different interpretations and different ordinances, and you need to follow each when you're in front of that body and going through that process. We are now in front of this commission, ultimately going to the Board of Commissioners for a land development application. We're deeming this entire garage, irrespective of whether it should be or it shouldn't be, but we're deeming it to be impervious. And we've calculated our stormwater with that in mind. This is a 100% impervious structure. It's not a building by any definition. It's a structure. It's 100% impervious. We've done our calculations. They've been reviewed. They've been opined upon. And they not only meet, but they exceed the township's requirements. So I think we've addressed this. It's been kind of ad nauseum. And just a couple of other points. We got a very long presentation at the last meeting with respect to green roofs. It was informative, but lengthy. I think this is a green roof. So they showed about 150 examples, some relevant, some not relevant, but there is a structure underneath this. And I'm saying this to make the record clear because there are obviously individuals who are here this evening who were not there last month. There's a very specific kind of soil, a subsurface retainage system that will collect all of this, and there are certain methods you need to do when you develop your roof to make it a green roof. So this is being designed and will be built pursuant to those standards by somebody who's done many of them, as we all saw. Lastly, the Pembroke North development we've heard a lot about tonight. Parking, impervious, it's a really different development. It's a building on top of a garage. This is not a building on top of this garage. There are more than 50 units. They have their off-street parking. There is a track record on this site, whether we want to count how many people drive in those units or not. There are 25 units in that building, and there are less than 20 spaces right now for all of them. That's to cover all their guests and all of the residents. And according to everybody here that is very active in that community, that's been more than sufficient parking to handle those folks. So we're reducing from 25 units to 12, and now proposing 24 spaces, increasing parking, reducing density, and they're saying, well, you need those extra spaces. I just don't see how that's the case, and I definitely don't think it's nonsensical to look at what's existing there now. And that's why the fact that it's a pre-existing condition, I think, is very relevant to this board's consideration with respect to whether a waiver is appropriate. There is a track record not only on this site, but on developments by Mr. Holloway that are very similar to this, where he does not have off-street parking, and they have done just fine. So I think that's relevant. I don't think it's nonsensical. We're asking for a waiver. Ms. Stern was very clear. Show us why you think you should get it, and that's why. So that responds to all of that. Thanks.
Thanks. Looks like two more public comments. I'm going to cut it off.
Thank you. I'll be very brief and just to follow up. Mr. Falcone mentioned that at the prior meetings this has been addressed, and I've never heard anyone except Mr. Falcone say that this is considered pervious for these purposes. Stormwater, a different issue when they talk about what they're considering it, but the staff over there, Matt, I've never heard anyone opine that because I've been told the meetings. Secondly, in relation to the issue at hand, in terms of that being a green roof or pervious, if you look at other townships, and I did some research 2 or 3 weeks ago on this, that allow green roofs and allow them to be counted as pervious, A, they explicitly put that in their ordinance, so they would override like what we have, and B, they require typically at least 3 feet of soil, not 8 inches plus the others that we're having. So please look at that if you have a chance, that anybody that does allow us to count overrides what's in theirs, and they make very stringent requirements on it. It's not just it gets to absorb water, because then we get, again, to the ludicrous situations about sponges and inches of sod. Thank you.
Last comment?
Hi, Patty Poole from 41 Luella Court, and this is kind of on the impervious and cemetery basis that John was talking. I know that all of you know Luella House very well, and you know the history of it, I would assume. You know the history behind the house and the property and how it was established. Am I correct in all of you assuming that you all are aware of that? Are you aware, because I've been doing research lately, and unfortunately I haven't gotten total facts down intact, which I will try to do as soon as possible and get it into your hands. But are you aware that that side yard where he wants to put that underground garage was a cemetery? That changes the whole dimension of things.
Was or is? I mean,
Well, there are bodies in there. There are bodies down there. According to the research that I have done, and I will get it to the township as soon as I possibly can. I've been doing research with the AIA, and I've been doing research. I'm an editorial specialist in research, and I've been doing the research with the government and everything else. So I would like to make it clear. I mean, if any of you know for certain and can give an affidavit that there are no dead bodies under there, I'll be glad to see it. But until I see something that indicates that there's nothing under there, I would like for people to consider that a possibility.
well, whoever did Mr. Holloway's Phase 1 and Phase 2 study might be able to give you that affidavit.
No, they have not been able to. That's why I had to go out and do my own research. So therefore, it's a point that has to be cleared.
What makes you think there's a cemetery under there?
Because I've been talking to Washington, I've been doing my editorial research, and I've talked to the AIA.
But have you seen anything in writing that says these people are buried there?
Yes. But
Where?
But I can't, quote, sign it into factual. But when I can, which I'm hoping to do within the next 2 or 3 days, I will present it to you, or I'll send it to you. Because according to the Askins, the history of the Askins, there's somebody.
If you find definitive proof of that, you'll forward it to the township office?
I'll forward it the
Great.
minute I get the documentation.
Thank you very much. I'm closing public comment, board discussion, or any further comment from the board?
Have you considered a mausoleum down there?
It is. Not the kind of comment I was looking for. Any constructive comment?
I just wanted to, I think I wanted to clarify a point Mr. Falcone made, both of the audience and of mine. I think Ms. Burns' calculation about that not all the apartments were being used, I think the point she was trying to make is that without all the apartments having drivers, they still have a parking issue. That's how I understood your comment, not that they don't have an issue on the court with regard to parking. That's how I took the neighbors' comments, is that even with their assertion that not all 25. Okay, that was one. And then I just wanted to clarify my asking about the hardship was actually in support of my feeling that we shouldn't grant the waiver, but rather that they should seek the variance. The variance is there. They have a hardship. Presumably, they'll be able to get their variance because of the front yard setback hardship and for the parking spaces. Yes, thank you, Doug. And so I would be opposed to granting the waiver for the parking, I think. And Mr. Falcone's comment about that some of CAS's other developments don't have visitor parking and it's worked out fine. By whose definition has it worked out fine? We are all very well aware that parking in Wayne is a huge issue. It comes up all the time. So I don't know whose definition of it's working fine. Maybe because I can't even fathom, but in any event. So I can't in good conscience waive a parking requirement. And I think that if the hardship's there, he has the recourse of seeking a zoning variance, which is what David referenced in the letter, and I recognize because of the front yard setback. That's all.
I'm just curious as to the opinion of the residents on the location of the required off-street parking. Just in looking at it on the surface, I mean, that is a tight turn they're adding. So to require that is what I'm curious as to why there's a pro and con there to that being required, purely from the circulation of that street.
I agree with Susan. I think that I'd like to see the parking in there. I want to make a couple of comments. First, on the green roof, I'd like to see more green roofs and more underground parking in this township, not less. I think this is a step forward. I understand that there are problems when you have the first underground parking and the first green roof, and it's not clearly delineated in the ordinances how that should be addressed. I think, we've done a very good job of looking after the township's interest with that. I'm excited to see that parking underground. I think that's a good thing. I think a lot of the neighbors at the beginning of this process were very excited to get that parking underground. And I also think that we need to encourage more green roofs as we go along in other developments in this township whenever we can. I wanted to address the steep slope issue briefly because I was very impressed with the work that Susan and Barron and other of the neighbors had done to check those spots. I don't doubt their calculations. I think there probably are. As they say, there are some areas where you can calculate the slopes to be over 20%. I also don't doubt the engineers' work that they've done. I think they've used standard industry procedures, and they've correctly contoured the land, and they've taken their measurements, and it's not showing steep slopes. But I think that we have to use the standard industry practices for defining these things. And I don't think this is a site where, it's a pure, natural, pristine wilderness site, and we have to be so careful to protect, where that's, I think it's important to protect the steep slopes. I don't think on this site it's the most important thing. I don't think we need to go out and measure every 5 inches of the property to see what the overall square footage or square yards are for the steep slopes. I think that, the standard industry work that the engineers have done should be adequate. And I'm going to leave that last one. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'll check in. I think I'll echo a lot of Julia's comments. I guess I'm in favor of granting the waiver. I think the percentage increase of parking over current conditions based, on the reduction in the number of units plus the additional spaces, I just think it's a huge improvement, and to push them to put 3 more spots on the circle where there could, as Kevin mentioned, could be some circulation issues. I guess I just don't see the need for it, particularly in light of how close metered parking is, and I just don't see the need to create additional parking where there is ample. Occasional overflow parking. It's not like it's day-to-day parking. It's visitor parking. It's weekends, Sundays, things like that. So, they're my comments.
I have 1 or 2.
That's good.
I agree that I think we should grant the waiver. I think the parking is tremendously available there. If you're talking about on a Saturday night, there's no parking anyway. I mean, those 3 spaces will be gone by somebody in a restaurant. And when your party comes over to have the dinner party in your unit, they're gone. So, I mean, they're spaces of opportunity. There is a lot of parking in the area. If any 2 people in any 2 units have a party, they're already too few. So, use the lots that exist and grant the waiver.
My comment on that is that's precisely the reason that it ought to be off-street parking actually in the center of the thing rather than along the street. I mean,
center of the property.
In the center of the, yeah. I mean, the Saldo says off-street parking, and it doesn't mean, happens to be technically along the side of the street. It's on the street. Does it meet the requirement? But the intent is to set them aside for the people that are residents there, and the fact that they're along the street means, as you say, by 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, they're filled. So, if you're going to go that route, I think not a waiver, but a variance would be the thing to do. My only other comment is, Mr. Holloway mentioned that he helped people give them quarters so that they can go and park in the public parking lot during the construction of the parking garage. There are a lot of people downtown are going to be really unhappy about that. If there are 15 people that are building that, they're going to take up 15 out of the 25 spaces that are available there. Just a thought.
Any other comment? John, let me ask you a procedural question. If the board feels that the waiver should not be granted, we would just take.
You have actually 3 waivers.
Correct.
You have 3 waivers in front of
Of
you.
any of the 3, if this board feels strong enough that they should go to zoning as opposed to being waived here, are we making a motion to deny the application, or are we making a recommendation that it goes to zoning?
Well, why don't you separate the decisions? I mean, ultimately, you got to vote on the plan, and the plan with or without the waivers. So you can approve the plan, deny the waivers, or approve all the waivers. So I think the easiest thing would be just vote on the waivers one by one. And then if someone wants to make a motion on the plan itself, you've dealt with the waivers, and you have the plan then to deal with. So you've got the parking issue, which we've been talking about, is 255-29A20. That would be the waiver request that you have from the applicant for those 3 off-street parking spaces on the site. So you're going to make a recommendation, and then that's going to go to the Board of Commissioners on that. So I would just go through these one by one, and someone make a motion on each one, and then make a motion on the plan.
Okay, thank you. So let's go ahead and do that with John's recommendation on the first waiver, which is
The first one.
the 500-foot. So that's paragraph 3. I don't know which letter we're looking at.
I would make a motion that we grant that waiver.
Okay.
I second.
So on section 255, 20-B, the significant man-made features with 500 feet of and within the site are required to be shown on the plans. So we have a motion to, correct, to approve that waiver. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? So the motion carries 8-1. The second waiver is section 255-27C1. The applicants indicate in the response letter that the plans, that the paths and the sidewalks located outside the right-of-way will remain private and will not used for public use. Do I have a motion to approve this waiver?
I would make a motion that we approve that waiver.
I have a motion to approve. May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand, or either hand. All opposed? Motion carries 8-1. Third waiver is number, it's our favorite one. Where is it?
It's actually in the bold above 5520 because it was part of the variance.
Gotcha.
It's on page 3.
So the motion on the waiver for the 3 additional parking spots to be waived. Do I have a motion to approve the waiver?
I make a motion to approve the waiver.
I have a motion approved. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. So the motion carries 5-4. So all 3 waivers have passed. Do I have a motion to approve the plan?
I move we approve the plan.
I have a motion approved. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Skip. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So I have 2 opposed. So the motion passes 6-2. Thank you very much.
I thought we had 9 people.
All right, back to the agenda.
Did somebody abstain? Did someone abstain? That was 6-2.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 1 abstain.
Thank you.
One abstain.
Thank you very much.
It's 6-2 with 1 abstain on the final vote, so. Any old business to discuss? Any new business to discuss? Meeting's adjourned. Happy holidays. We will see you in January. Thank you. Oh, next week. I'm sorry. Oh, my God. Yeah, next week. Next Tuesday, part 2. Thank you.